Out front next, Bolton bites the dust. The president firing his national security advisor, not because they openly disagreed on policy. No, this was actually because of a personal vendetta. Plus the Trump slump, a new CNN poll revealing what could be great concern to the president and his re-election hopes. And polls about to close in a crucial special election that has national implications. Results expected to come in this hour. Let's go out front. And good evening, I'm Erin Burnett. Out front tonight, it was personal. We are learning more this hour about the bitter breakup between Trump and Bolton. A source tells CNN that President Trump turned on his now former national security advisor, John Bolton, because he thought Bolton made him look bad this week. Trump wanted to humiliate Bolton in exchange. Well, there's Bolton at the White House, 8:44 a.m. this morning. Work as usual, taking a phone call outside. He then went in and led a meeting with top administration officials. And then boom. A tweet. The operative part of that tweet, quote, "I informed John Bolton last night that his services are no longer needed at the White House." Well, that's not Bolton's version. Now, sources tell CNN Trump was livid, that Bolton seemed to be the source for a story about how Bolton told Trump that hosting the Taliban at Camp David was a bad idea. Now, Trump, of course, was resoundingly slammed for that summit plan right around the 9/11 anniversary. He felt Bolton was the one who made him look bad. Tonight, Bolton is fighting back. So the president says he's the one who fired Bolton and he did it last night. Bolton saying, no way, he resigned. Quote, "I offered to resign last night and President Trump said, let's talk about it tomorrow." Trump wanted public embarrassment for Bolton. He let him come to work and take that call and be on camera. A press release even came out saying Bolton was going to appear at a briefing with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, who were also blindsided by Trump's move.
Bolton was on the guidance to be here. So were you two blindsided by what occurred today? That he's no longer with the administration? Was it news to you today? Because last night you were told he would be here today.
Yeah, I'm never surprised.
Well, let me ask you.
And I don't mean that on just this issue.
I have to think about what Trump thinks hearing that. I mean, look at their faces again. Yeah, decided to freeze it. They get it. They work for a person whose sudden rage and focus on personal slights means that nothing is normal and nothing can surprise them. One source close to the administration telling CNN today, after the president's, well, whatever word you'd like to use, resignation, firing, it's a real snake pit run by an erratic president who is hard to manage and who brings out the worst sensibilities in people. Caitlin Collins is out front live outside the White House. So, Caitlin, what more are you learning about what went down here?
Well, Aaron, we know there was this Oval Office meeting between President Trump and John Bolton yesterday, which we are told turned into this bitter disagreement over that decision by the president to initially host leaders of the Taliban at Camp David, something that John Bolton strongly disagreed with. But not only that, he also thought that the Taliban was getting too much leverage in those U.S.-Taliban peace talks. But the president was furious about the fact that he believed Bolton had made all too public how much he was pushing back on the president's plan to host them at Camp David. And it essentially turned into this fight, which is what led to this today, where the president is insisting he fired John Bolton. John Bolton is insisting that he resigned. But of course, this was just the straw that broke the camel's back. It is not the only issue that lies with John Bolton in this West Wing. He was someone who was essentially isolated from President Trump, iced out by Mick Mulvaney, the chief of staff, and barely on speaking terms with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. So essentially you saw this coming. And one evidence of that was that at the G7 summit in France just a few weeks ago, John Bolton was tentatively scheduled to go on the Sunday shows, defend the administration, news of day. But we are told by sources that he said he was uncomfortable defending their position on Russia, which you know had become a big topic during that summit. And essentially his aides were only defending it by saying that they believed Larry Kudlow or a Stephen Mnuchin was better suited at defending their position on tariffs. But that essentially showed you that if you work in the Trump White House, you have to be willing to go on TV and defend the president's policies. And that is something that John Bolton wasn't willing to do during that summit. And now the president says he's going to announce his fourth national security advisor next week. Until then, Bolton's deputy, Charlie Kupperman, is going to take over in the meanwhile, Aaron.
All right. Thank you very much, Caitlin. And, I'll emphasize this later, but, he's had more national security advisors in the past 3 years than the last three presidents had in their entire 2 terms. Out front now, Democratic Congressman Mike Quigley, who sits on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, look, okay, let's be honest. You didn't like John Bolton. You recently questioned if anyone would be surprised if he got the United States into a war with Iran over very, very questionable intelligence, in your words. So Are you, bottom line, happy that all this has happened?
Well, I'm never fully happy with anything this president does. Sure, I'm glad John Bolton is gone, one of the chief architects of the Iraq War, the military first option, the unilateral action option, using questionable intelligence. Sure, I'm glad he's gone, but obviously two main concerns. First, it's hard to believe his successor won't be of the same cloth. And second, you mentioned this is the fourth national security advisor, second Secretary of State, third Chief of Staff. It's a foreign policy in shambles anyway, but the lack of continuity certainly hurts.
You know, the thing about it is, though, Bolton, did fight the president strenuously on this whole idea of bringing the Taliban to Camp David, which, the president was resoundingly criticized for on both sides of the aisle. Could it be that Trump is actually worse off without Bolton? And I know you disagreed with Bolton on a lot of things, but is it possible that having him gone is worse?
Well, it could be, but only in one sense, and that is the overriding problem, whether it's Bolton or not, is the president doesn't want anyone who's just going to say yes or agree or show him great adulation. So that's the bigger concern. It isn't that it's John, is that he doesn't want anybody who's going to disagree with him. Foreign policy, especially now, is a difficult task enough as it is without these internal problems. The President of the United States should be surrounding himself with a team of rivals who are going to disagree with him. And then at the very end, using all of that advice, good and bad, the president hopefully makes the right decision.
So I want to play for you the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who obviously personally is no fan of Bolton's. We all know that, oil and water, policy-wise as well. But, he was asked whether he knew Bolton's departure was coming. And I just want to play that exchange again, because I have to say, he doesn't usually crack in terms of his reaction. But this was telling. Here he is.
Bolton was on the guidance to be here. So were you two blindsided by what occurred today? That he's no longer with the administration? Was it news to you today? Because last night you were told he would be here today.
Yeah, I'm never surprised.
Well, let me ask you.
And I don't mean that on just this issue.
Never surprised, not just on this issue, as he's laughing. What do you make of that?
It's the second half of the problem of the Trump administration's foreign policy. Our allies are constantly surprised. They don't know what to expect. If anything, they want certainty. And any number of things that have taken place in the last several months have given them no assurance that they can trust us, they can count on us, or they know what the president's going to do next.
I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying Secretary Pompeo, of course, has been, he's been loyal, but he's very respected. Was he standing up to the president there?
In his own mild way, yes. That's about as much as anyone can stand up to the president at this point.
So I want to ask you about one other major story tonight. Multiple senior officials, congressmen who served under Trump, are telling us that the president has repeatedly expressed opposition to using basically spies, right? Covert sources of people who are not American to get information. He doesn't trust them, and he thinks it will damage his relationship with foreign leaders because the United States is using spies from those countries. Do you think that he has a point?
I think the president has no clue what he's thinking about or talking about when he says that. The fact of the matter is our country is safer because other countries share critical information with us. If anyone thinks our intelligence service can get all the information in the world, it is a big, complicated world. In some of those countries, in Eastern Europe, for example, they don't have the military might, and maybe they don't spend enough of their percentage of GDP on the military. But I can tell you, my third term on the Intelligence Committee, they keep us safe. Our allies share critical information that saves Americans' lives. And when the president does something to denigrate them, as he denigrates our own intel service, we are less safe.
So, this comes after we learn that the United States, extracted one of the highest level sources that the U.S. had inside the Russian government, senior source that the United States had cultivated for years, a source who was central to the crucial conclusion, right, to knowing that Vladimir Putin himself directed Russian intervention in the United States election. This is as important and significant and longstanding of a source in the Russian government as we have. And the reason the United States did this and pulled this person out of Moscow was fear that Trump could expose. this person. Do you think that President Trump would purposefully have given that information to the Russians, or would it just have been out of cluelessness?
Well, the president can do any number of things, wittingly or unwittingly. I can't comment on the merits of that extraordinarily sensitive story. But what I'll say is this. The mere fact that the reports are out there, not just of this incident, but the meeting in the Oval Office with the Russians, the satellite photos involving the Iranians, the fact that the mere reports are out there are enough to discourage our allies from sharing critical information because they don't think that information will be kept safe. And obviously that will impact their sources and methods, making them less safe.
And just so that we understand, I know it's highly sensitive, but can you tell me whether your committee has been briefed about this spy and what happened, the extraction and the merits?
Yeah, just doing my job right, I can't comment on that. I apologize.
All right, well, that's okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, Congressman.
Anytime, thank you.
And next, breaking news, North Korea now saying it has fired a, quote, super large multiple rocket launcher, coming on the same day that Hawk John Bolton is cut loose. Is North Korea emboldened? Plus, Elizabeth Warren about to speak to another big crowd in Texas. What does the enthusiasm tell us about her campaign? And the breaking news, polls just about to close in that crucial special election that could set the stage for 2020. Breaking news, Kim Jong-un overseeing a major weapons test. North Korea announcing tonight it fired a, quote, super large multiple rocket launcher. The news coming just hours after longtime North Korea hawk John Bolton's tenure as Trump's top national security advisor ended in a complete breakdown with Trump. Out front now, former advisor to 4 presidents David Gergen, our chief political analyst Gloria Borger, and Atlantic staff writer Graham Wood, who wrote an article last year titled John Bolton May Save Us All. David Gergen, there is obviously no love lost between North Korea and John Bolton. The country has called him human scum and a defective human product, quote, before. Could Bolton's abrupt and nasty departure embolden Kim?
Absolutely. I think it's going to embolden some other countries. Initially, they're going to wait. They're going to try to poke and see if they can cause some mischief or some mayhem and see how we'll snap back, realizing that the national security team under the president is not complete. Now we have yet another acting person coming into the NSC. The NSC staff very loyal to Bolton. They don't know where they're going. So this is a good time for our rivals to experiment. That said, I think that most people in the foreign policy community, especially the Democrats in foreign policy, are very relieved that Bolton is going in one sense. Right. That is, it makes it less likely we'll go to war.
Is it a be careful what you wish for them, tonight? Gloria, yeah. I mean, look, Bolton took Kim on, right? So, and that is in stark contrast to Trump, who at least publicly has acquiesced to almost every one of Kim's requests, right? Even ending U.S. military drills, even as Kim has ramped up missile tests. Sure. So the contrast between Bolton's longstanding views on Korea and Trump's position could not be more stark. Lest anyone forget, here they are.
We can overthrow Kim Jong-un's regime.
He's a, funny guy. He's a very smart guy. He's a great negotiator. He loves his people.
The way you eliminate the North Korean nuclear program is to eliminate North Korea.
A lot of friendships have been made, and this has been in particular a great friendship.
The fact is, we've failed for 25 years because of diplomatic efforts to chit-chat North Korea out of nuclear weapons.
He wrote me beautiful letters, and they're great letters. We fell in love.
Well, now the love narrative, Gloria, wins out.
Right, and it makes you wonder, just looking through all of those clips, it makes you wonder why Donald Trump hired Bolton in the first place. They disagree on just about everything, particularly something like North Korea. And he could have just Googled the guy's name and found out exactly what he thought. So it's really no surprise in the end that over the Taliban going to Camp David and the question of who leaked disagreement within the administration and Trump pointing the finger at Bolton, it's no surprise that in the end it all fell apart.
it all fell apart. But of course, and it should be no surprise it didn't fall apart for any substantive reason, but because of personal vendettas and issues. I mean, Graham, a senior member of the Trump administration, you remember that scathing op-ed in the New York Times, right? The quote in part, many of the senior officials in his own administration are working diligently from within to frustrate parts of his agenda and his worst inclinations. We fully recognize what is happening, and we are trying to do what's right, even when Donald Trump won't. You say, and you know him very well, that Bolton was the last adult in the room.
Yeah, Bolton was the last person in the Trump national security establishment who actually had some experience in a properly functioning White House. So he was an important person just because he brought some experience to the table. What he might have been, however, is a crazy or bellicose adult in the room, but he was an adult in the room, so he was important in that, at least in that regard.
And when you say that he could be the one that saves Donald Trump, I mean, I know you weren't referring to this specific moment, but you're making a bigger point here, which is that even if you don't like what he thought, he provided a value.
Yeah, he had seen process work. He'd seen a normal White House working. And because of that, he knew how processes worked. And it just turned out that those processes didn't matter that much because all that really matters is staying in the good graces of Donald Trump, which John Bolton was not able to do.
Right. I mean, and David, that is what it comes down to, right? That it wasn't these disagreements on policy, which were known, as Gloria points out, well before John Bolton ever took the job, right? It was personal bitterness and acrimony, and and then Trump choosing to do it in a humiliating way this morning. David, the bottom line is there's been 4 national security advisors for Trump in less than 3 years, which is more than the last 3 presidents had in their entire 2 terms combined. So, is this hurting United States security?
I think it does weaken the United States security in one fundamental way. I think that Graham was right, but John Bolton was the adult in the room, or the more experienced person in the room. And when you're into your 4th person in 3 years, you're really reaching down into the 2nd or 3rd string. You just don't get the kind of competence, and particularly knowing if you go to work now with this president, you're not going to last. He's going to turn on you at some point. He's going to be bitter towards you. There's no class in the way you're going to be dumped out the door. I just think we don't get the kind of high-quality people that you want to get and you need to have around the president, whoever he is.
So Graham, you've spent a lot of time around John Bolton, right? You've written about him in depth. So he's now come out and contradicted the president, right? The president's make it clear I fired you, and he comes out and says, no, make it clear I resigned. Do you think Bolton's going to do what a lot of others haven't done?
I think he's already started with that.
Tell all, fight back.
Yeah, the president's tweet was an undignified way to dismiss a national security advisor. It was not the type of tweet or not the type of missive that would send someone off with appreciation. So John Bolton is a very prideful man. He's someone who does not let vendettas just disappear. He holds grudges. He's best known in Washington for doing that. So I would be surprised if those grudges were not coming to you within a matter of hours, not days.
Gloria?
And Aaron, let me just add something here, because I heard from a senior Democratic foreign policy maven, if you will, unsolicited today. And he made the point to me about how we all ought to be thinking about national security, the national security operation inside the White House, which he called completely dysfunctional. And he said, look, it's important to reflect on the fact that Mike Pompeo is now the last person standing. Everyone else, McMaster, Mattis, Coates, Tillerson, Kelly, Kirstjen Nielsen, found it impossible, he said, to work with Trump, and they come away very bitter about their experience. So will he talk about it? I bet he will.
I mean, right. And of course, David Gergen, it does put so much pressure on Mike Pompeo, who, I do emphasize it is not in his normal way to sort of make a joke about how, you never know what you're going to get from that guy who works 2 doors down, today. That he laughed at the president.
But listen, this is a big victory for Pompeo. He gets a man out the door that they weren't even on speaking terms. And he's got the whole agenda. I think it is going to make it tougher for him to accept these invitations to come out and run for the Senate, because he is the last man standing. I would think he's going to be under heavy pressure to stay in. But still, you can't run this government with one strong person out of the State Department. You need a team of people, first-class people, to do it. And that's what's missing here.
All right. Thank you all very much. And next, a new CNN poll could spell trouble for Trump in 2020, or could it? Plus, breaking news. We are just minutes away from polls closing in a crucial special election. The first results are about to come in. So, of course, We are going to go to the wall and John King. Right now, Elizabeth Warren getting ready to speak to a big crowd in Texas. You see that live there. It is a red state that she wants to put into play. And, you know, when you look at all those people gathering, she's not yet on stage. It does bring to mind something interesting. Some of her crowds lately have even exceeded some of Trump's bragged about crowd sizes. So he's bragged about crowds recently, and then she's pulled a crowd even bigger. Out front now, Keith Boykin, former Clinton White House aide, and Scott Jennings, former special assistant to President George W. Bush. So, Keith, you know, as we look at that crowd here, we'll put them back up. They're waiting for her. She's rising in the polls. Her crowd tonight, wherever she is, by far, her crowds overall are the biggest in the Democratic field, and as I point out, rivaling Trump's in some cases. Is this a sign he should be worried?
I don't know if it's a sign that Trump should be worried, but it is an indication the Democrats are enthusiastic about her candidacy and about Democrats in general. We saw this with the momentum from the 2018 midterm elections. And the problem, though, is how do you determine how this fits into the 2020 cycle? And that's something nobody can really figure out at this early stage. I'm really skeptical of reading too much into the polls at this point. But I do think it's a good sign for Elizabeth Warren. Remember, back in December, on New Year's Eve, when she announced her candidacy, a lot of people thought she was dead in the water. And here she is, she's drawing tens of thousands of people in some of her crowds.
And this is, you know, obviously in the context of the whole Pocahontas thing and putting whatever she did with putting, you know, Native American ancestry on. People know all that.
Yeah.
They know it. As Trump already said, they already know it. He's already used it. He's got to find something else because they clearly don't care. Scott, these crowds are getting the attention of President Trump. They are, and they're irking him. Listen.
I have crowds that are many times what her crowds are. Nobody ever talks about them. Nobody wants to talk about them. With her the other day, they say she had 15. If you really count them up, it looked like about 8 or 9. And the biggest story was her crowds. That's like a small crowd for me.
You know, Scott, when I hear something like that, I want to laugh, and then I realize this is the reality of the world we live in. Okay, is he underestimating her as a challenger, or is actually his sort of obsession there, as strange as that was, proof that he is not underestimating her?
Well, I think he's probably watches more news coverage of this primary than any of the three of us sitting here. And so when he sees news coverage that says somebody's getting big crowds, obviously that perks up his ears. Look, I think they're going to run against her if she's the nominee the same way they run against any of them. You know, they're all basically coming out for the same kind of programming across, you know, economic, immigration, national security issues. And so I think they'll end up treating her the exact same way and try to make it a real choice instead of a referendum on him. Do you want a more left-leaning socialist country, or do you want more, you know, free market, you know, type of programming that I'm offering?
Well,
so
you strategist types may try to do that, but he's going to be yelling about Pocahontas and crowds.
Oh, sure. I think that'll definitely be part of the matrix as well. And by the way, you know, he'll be running again in a campaign environment where he's almost certain to have his own image will probably be worse, at least at the outset, than the Democratic nominee. And he'll have to figure out again how to win in that kind of environment. He did it in 2016, and he'll have to do it again in 2020.
So Keith, here's the thing. You know, this comes, I think, maybe perhaps what you're alluding to, Scott. A new CNN poll tonight shows 60% of Americans say that President Trump does not deserve a second term. His approval rating is now at 39%. Okay, which is the lowest for him in, I believe, 9 months. Obama, though, was only at 43% at this point in the first term. Clinton was only at 44%. Right. They both won. Now, I know in the world of political polls, you could say 39 versus 43, big difference. But, you know, it doesn't sound like a big difference. Does this low approval really matter?
Well, yes and no. I don't think that the 5-point spread between Obama and Trump is really statistically significant in terms of where Trump stands. What's more important is the larger trend and the fact that for the entirety of his administration, he has never once been above 50% in the public opinion poll averages. That's never happened in modern polling before. We've never seen any president in modern history who's been so despised. And not only that, we've also never seen a president who's made no attempt whatsoever to reach beyond his base, to try to expand the electorate so he can actually get independents to vote for him and possibly even Democrats to vote for him. He's running entirely on getting out of his base, and he has no intention of trying to convince anybody else.
Scott.
Yeah, in this CNN poll, I was looking back on the polling on him in the last 2 weeks of the campaign in 2016.
Yeah.
His favorable, unfavorable was about 39 to 58. at the end of the election,
darn
and
close to
Hillary's was
now.
about 10 points better than that. And so he's pretty much, frankly, about where he was, and he figured out how to win an election when he was a little bit more unpopular than his opponent. So what does that mean? It means you're going to try to define your opponent. In a vacuum, you can say, I don't want to re-elect Trump. But elections aren't vacuums, they're choices. And so you try to get those people that are uneasy about you and say the other choice is that much worse. And so, again, I think that's why you're going to see him run against all these Democrats virtually the same, which is that they're all running on the same program, which would take us in the wrong direction.
So it's an interesting point you make, right, Keith, that people, he won with a pretty despising set of numbers, right? So he won. And now here he is. One of the things, and I don't know that this is directly linked to approval, but I will note, his approval rating has dipped on the economy below 50% for the first time since January. That had been something really holding him up. That has now dipped below. And another new poll from ABC News, the Washington Post, shows a majority of voters expect a recession within the year. Okay. Now, if there is not a recession, which we should all hope there is not, could Trump's numbers surge? Because maybe part of the reason is people expecting something bad is going to happen to them, and then it doesn't.
Well, I don't think the recession or not really matters because his numbers have been low in spite of the fact that the public has for a long time assumed that the economy is actually strong.
Yes.
Now, I didn't give him any credit for that, but the public has assumed that. When you think about what the catastrophes that have happened since he's taken office, though, after the tax cuts even, when you see his appointment of Jerome Powell, and he's criticizing the Fed for not lowering interest rates, you see the president is launching his trade wars and he has to bail out the farmers. You see the deficit is rising to almost a trillion dollars. The debt has increased by $2 trillion. And we have a president who seems to be completely unaware of all this because he's just telling everybody the economy is great and don't pay attention to all the indicators that are telling you that you should be alarmed.
Scott, final word.
Yeah, I think macro indicators mean less to voters than micro indicators. Is my own paycheck going up? Do I feel secure in my own job? Those are the kinds of things that if you're an incumbent presidential campaign, you're more worried about. So to the extent that, say, white-collar workers in the suburbs that stuck with Trump to some degree in 2016 are feeling worse on those indicators, those personal indicators in 2020, that is a red flashing light for them. And they've got to get the president focused on talking to them about, A, how he's working to shore up those indicators, and B, presenting the Democrats as riskier alternatives. So if you're a little worried about the future today, imagine how bad it could get if, say, Elizabeth Warren shows up and raises your taxes and so on and so forth.
Well,
so
that's
again,
what they'll say.
the macro indicators, I think, fascinate the media, but it's the micro indicators. Is my own paycheck and my own job, my own 529 account for my kids, does that stuff feel good to me?
Well,
and crowd size, perhaps, is the derivative indicator of how people feel. I mean, you're not going to show up at something unless you're passionate about somebody. It takes a lot of time to do that. All right, thank you both. And next, we're standing by for the first results from a special election that could alter the race for 2020. John King is at the magic wall. Plus, a new investigation uncovering the number of taxpayer-funded stays at Trump's resorts is surging. And the president is benefiting. So, what will be done? Breaking news, polls just closing in a crucial special election, an election the president is watching extremely closely. It's North Carolina's 9th congressional district. Democrat Dan McCready versus Republican Dan Bishop. So Trump actually went to the state last night, hosted a big rally for Bishop. Pence came, Don Jr. came. He cares. Out front now, CNN chief national correspondent and the host of Inside Politics, John King, who also cares about this one because it matters, John. I mean, Trump won the district by 12 points. This, though, is incredibly close. So why does it matter so much to Trump?
It matters so much, Aaron, because he's trying to see the climate into 2020. He knows, even just tonight, the new CNN poll, 6 in 10 Americans say they want a new president. The president wants to prove all that wrong as he tries to recreate this. This is the 2016 map. No, the president does not like to be reminded he lost the popular vote, but he does like to look at this map and say, I won the Electoral College. And, of course, North Carolina was a big part of that. A very competitive state, but the president won over Hillary Clinton there by a pretty decent margin. So what about North Carolina 9? Let's take a look here. Let's bring this up. This is the district at play tonight. North Carolina 9, you mentioned. President won it by a healthy margin. Let me get straight into the district here. We come forward here and we look at the district. President won the district by 12 points. So why are we talking about this tonight? Why isn't this a lock for the Republicans? Because of what happened in 2018. Republicans got hammered in the suburbs. A revolt against the President of the United States that made Nancy Pelosi Speaker and cost House Republicans their majority. So in both parties, they want to know, is that carrying over? As we go from 2019 closer to 2020, is that carrying over? So let's take a closer look at the district and stretch it out. Here, Mecklenburg County, near Charlotte. This is the biggest part of the district. If you go back to 2016, it's in vogue these days to draw on maps, Aaron. This is the entire county. This is the entire county.
You got exact shape, too.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton won Mecklenburg County back in 2016. She won the entire county, but the parts of the county that are in the 9th district, the president carried. Not by a huge margin, though. Why is this important? Charlotte, suburbs, the beginning of the exurbs. This is an area that has been trending from the Republicans to the Democrats. Doesn't continue tonight. Did the president's visit turn out Republicans, or does it turn out suburbanites and people in the close-in exurbs who are tired of the president? That's one of the things we're going to learn, not only in that end of the district, but the other end of the district over here in Cumberland County. Again, Fayetteville right here. Anywhere in America, find an urban area, it's likely to be blue. As you move away, the close-in suburbs are blue. This is the area farther out the Republicans have been protecting. These are a lot of votes in this district right here. Does this stay red tonight as we get the votes? We're told we'll get the first votes in about 30 minutes or so. So it's one district in North Carolina, but look how close Cumberland County was in the presidential race. Can the Democrats turn out enough people? Can the Republicans fire things up? Both parties, Aaron, testing technology in this race as they go into 2020 as well. So just one district, but it could be important.
All right. Thank you very much, John King. And out front now, our senior political reporter, Nia Malika Henderson. Okay, so look, the bottom line is it's clear. Trump cares a lot about this, and he is watching this one incredibly closely.
Yeah, and everyone. I mean, Republicans and Democrats both watching this. A lot of money poured into this race. $11 million. The outside committee for Republicans poured a lot of money, a lot of ads on the air, because they know this is going to tell them something about Trump's strength. If you think about Dan Bishop, he's the Republican. He is running on Trump, basically. He has said it's all about Trump. He would be essentially a foot soldier in Trump's culture war, if you will. And he's run a campaign against the Democrat there, Dan McCready, basically calling him a socialist, right? I mean, that too is the Republican Party playbook. It's Trump's party's, it's Trump's playbook as well. So yeah, a lot of eyeballs on this race. Listen, we might not know by the end of the night. If you think about the last race that was tossed out, that was only about 1,000 votes or so. Of course, as I said, it got tossed out. So we could be here a long night. All the people I've talked to on both sides said this is going to be tight, tight, tight.
Which is amazing because, to the point John was making, right? Yeah, I mean, so Trump wins this district by 9 points. So okay, there's the if Democrats win, fine. We all get it. We all get the message. What about if Republicans win, but by substantially less?
That shows that the trend that John King is talking about, this idea of folks, Republicans who are white and college educated. These are sort of suburban Republicans who are traditionally a part of the Republican tent. It'll tell us something about how they're feeling about the Republican brand, about obviously the
so if it's a GOP but by 3, that's still
it's
a big deal.
So shows that Republicans are losing a bit of their edge with this population of voters. And remember, this is also the population of voters that Biden thinks that he can get, right? These Republican voters who are disaffected with the party, the direction the president is going in terms of any number of issues, immigration, but also just the tone and the chaos, which again, he sort of underscored by what happened today with John Bolton.
All right. Thank you very much, Nia. And next, Democrats with a new game plan tonight to get to the bottom of why the Air Force has been staying at Trump's resort. Plus, Jeannie Moos on the president returning to the trail to nowhere.
Mr. Tallahassee Trail or Appalachian Trail. He's the Appalachian Trail, right? The Tallahassee Trail is nice, too.
New today, the House Oversight Committee threatening to subpoena the Department of Defense for documents related to President Trump's golf resort in Scotland. The committee investigating Air Force crews staying at the president's resort. The top House Republican dismissing concerns.
The president's resorts are hotels that he owns. People are traveling. It's just like any other hotel. Is it different that if I go and stay or eat at a Marriott here or eat at the Trump? The president isn't asking me to. It's he's competing in a private enterprise.
Of course, the president has said he would not be in private enterprise because he is the president and he has broken that promise. And, this isn't like any hotel. It's owned by the president of the United States, who is personally profiting from taxpayer money being spent there. Out front now, New York Times investigative reporter Eric Lipton. Eric, look, we know that the president told Mike Pence to stay at his resort in Ireland. The Pence's chief of staff said that that's what happened. And now we've got the Air Force apparently staying at a Trump resort because they were refueling at an airport. Trump tweeted, Eric, I know nothing about an Air Force plane landing at an airport, which I do not own and have nothing to do with, near Turnberry Resort, which I do own in Scotland, filling up with fuel with the crew staying overnight at Turnberry. They have good taste. Nothing to do with me. Just to make it clear, Eric, the tweet is false because you report Trump does have something to do with that airport. What did you find?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of an unprecedented situation in modern United States history to have a president who is, essentially the beneficial owner of a chain of hotels and golf courses at the same time as he's the commander-in-chief. And I mean, what we know is that in 2014, when Trump family first bought this property, they immediately began negotiations with the local airport there to try to increase airport traffic, to look for ways to boost an airport that's struggling financially. And in addition to talking about ways to increase airport traffic, they had negotiations with the airport management about potentially referring air crews that were landing at the airport to their hotel. And they discussed what rates they would charge and tried to get on a list, which they ended up getting on such a list. So now they're one of a dozen hotels that the airport refers air crews that are arriving to, and that's why the Air Force crews are heading to the Trump Turnberry along with other hotels in that area, because when they land and they ask where should we go.
Okay, so what's interesting is that, but I'm just making the point he has nothing to do with it. Well, that's not true because you've done the reporting and they negotiated, the Trump organization, a very, a specific thing here. You also found the result of that, Eric. The number of stops by Air Force planes, again, taxpayer funded, at this airport rose from 180 in 2017, Trump's first year in office, to 257 last year, 259 already this year, and we're at the beginning of September. So we know Trump is not divested from the Trump organization, right? He is clearly benefiting from this surge, and this is taxpayer money.
Yeah, and this is, be it the Mar-a-Lago, the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., the Bedminster in New Jersey, or any of the other, there are millions of dollars that are going into the Trump businesses that are coming from candidates spending there, lobbyists, evangelical groups, and also from the U.S. military, from the State Department. Again, it's a very unusual situation that creates all kinds of ethical questions.
Well, it certainly does, and certainly he is profiting from his role as president. I guess we know that there are some investigating whether it is inappropriate or illegal or not. Eric, thank you.
Thank you.
And next, Jeannie Mose on the hunt for Trump's Tallahassee Trail.
Tallahassee Trail. The Tallahassee Trail. Do they have a Tallahassee Trail in Argentina?
President Trump can't get his attacks on rival Mark Sanford quite right. Here's Jeannie Mose.
When President Trump flings mud at his latest primary challenger for having an affair, well, no wonder someone responded, "Let him who hath not had an extramarital affair cast the first tweet." But not only does the president keep casting, he keeps taking the wrong trail.
Mr. Tallahassee Trail or Appalachian Trail. He's the Appalachian Trail, right? The Tallahassee Trail is nice, too.
The Appalachian Trail is where Mark Sanford's aide said he was hiking when the then South Carolina governor was actually in Argentina with his mistress. But President Trump keeps getting lost.
On the Tallahassee Trail, but he was actually in Argentina. The Tallahassee Trail must be a beautiful place. Do they have a Tallahassee Trail in Argentina? I don't think, right? No?
Here's a shocker. There is no Tallahassee Trail.
Well, actually, there is. The Tallahassee-St. Mark's Rail Trail, but it had nothing to do with Mark Sanford's saga.
I love the Appalachian Trail.
President Trump didn't just get his trails crossed. He called Sanford's lover his flaming dancer friend. Flaming dancer? This calls for some Trump translation.
Now, we think he meant to type flamingo dancer.
Flamingo dancers from Argentina.
But unless you mean dancing flamingos, the correct word is flamenco dancer.
Which also would have been wrong because there is no evidence Sanford's former mistress had ever been a flamenco dancer.
But the Trumpian flaming dancer caught fire on the internet. People kept changing the lyrics to Elton John's Tiny Dancer. Hold me closer, flaming dancer.
Hold me closer, tiny dancer.
Even if she's not a flamenco dancer. Jeannie Mose, CNN, New York.
Thanks for joining us. Anderson starts now.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Polls are closed and the vote count is underway in North Carolina, where the final race of the 2018 congressional midterms is finally being decided and could have a lot to say about 2020. We're going to bring you the latest on that as we learn more as the votes are being counted, along with new CNN polling on whether voters think that President Trump deserves to be reelected. New numbers out tonight. We begin, though, keeping them honest, with the forced departure of the president's third national security advisor, John Bolton, from a White House that a source close to the administration calls, quote, a real snake pit. The source, who spoke to the Lead's Jake Tapper, goes on to say it is run by, quote, an erratic president who is hard to manage and who brings out the worst sensibilities in people, unquote. We also might add who fires people on Twitter. I'm quoting now. I informed John Bolton last night that his services are no longer needed at the White House. I disagreed strongly with many of his suggestions, as did others in the administration and therefore I asked John for his resignation, which was given to me this morning, which, by the way, Ambassador Bolton disputes that account. He says he offered his resignation last night, and the president told him, quote, let's talk about it tomorrow. In any case, it seems no one told the White House press office, which had just announced Bolton's presence at a joint press conference this afternoon. An hour later, he was gone. Again, he is the third national security advisor to be shown the door. As you well know, the first was Michael Flynn. He's now a convicted felon who is back in the headlines today, a judge setting his sentencing date for the 18th of December. As for the second, H.R. McMaster, the president is said to be in touch with him, even reportedly telling McMaster that he misses him. As for Bolton, well, the president once had plenty of praise for him, his intelligence, and perhaps most important to this president, his tough guy image.
I think he's, tough cookie, knows what he's talking about. John is a terrific guy. We had some really good meetings with him, knows a lot, has a good number of ideas that I must tell you I agree very much with. I think he's going to be a fantastic representative of our team. He's highly respected by everybody in this room.
Great John Bolton. They think he's so nasty and so tough that I have to hold him back, okay? It's pretty great. And he's doing a great job.
He has strong views on things, but that's okay. I actually temper John, which is pretty amazing, isn't it? I have different sides. I mean, I have John Bolton, and I have other people that are a little more dovish than him. And ultimately, I make the decision. No, I like John.
Well, those feelings have apparently been cooling all year, with the two clashing over Iran, North Korea, Russia, and more recently, the president's plan to invite the Taliban to Camp David. So was he fired for that, for daring to speak out against the idea of bringing the Taliban to Camp David on the eve of the anniversary of 9/11? We don't know for sure because we've actually yet to hear from Bolton, aside from one tweet saying that he offered to resign. As much as policy differences may have factored into this, the mode, the manner, the apparent chaos surrounding it, the sudden nature of it, all of it speaks to something else about the way this White House in particular operates. And it underscores that new reporting tonight on what Jake Tapper's source says, and I quote, an administration with dysfunctional processes and a bureaucracy, one that attracts people who are willing to make the big compromise to work for Trump, so they're especially cutthroat. It's a real snake pit. On the national security side, that includes people who've come and gone, like Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, also fired by tweet. Defense Secretary James Mattis, who quit reportedly in frustration over the president's snap decision to pull out of Syria. Kirstjen Nielsen and John Kelly at DHS, DNI Dan Coates, NSA Director Mike Rogers, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. Not all directly clashed with the president before leaving or being shown the door, but whatever the motivation was, the amount of turnover in what used to be seen as critical positions is unprecedented. And when many of them leave, they're being replaced essentially by temps. These are the acting members of his cabinet now, including Charles Kupperman, the new acting national security advisor. The president has said in his words, I like acting, because he says it gives him more flexibility. And we might add, it cuts down on dissenting points of view, which might be just fine for a president who considers himself his own best press secretary, his own best intelligence analyst, even his own best hurricane forecaster. As he himself said yesterday when asked why he called for, then canceled the Taliban meetings, I took my own advice. More now on all of this. Our Jim Acosta is at the White House. He has some new reporting on it. Jim, what have you learned from sources?
Well, Anderson, we know that one of the reasons why the president decided to fire the national security advisor, John Bolton, was because both he and the vice president were upset with this idea that John Bolton and someone on his team were spreading the story around that the vice president was joining up with John Bolton and opposing this idea of peace talks at Camp David with the Taliban. But just this evening, Anderson, I talked to a source close to the White House who said that the president has been complaining about John Bolton wanting to, quote, start a war since the beginning of his tenure as national security advisor. The source also close to the White House shed some light on Bolton's thinking in all of this, saying that Bolton is very concerned about the president's desire to have a meeting with the Iranian president, Hassan Rouhani. According to this source close to the White House, John Bolton is worried that the president, quote, caves too much in his meetings with these dictators like Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, and others that the president has met with over the last 3 years of this administration.
Bolton's exit, I mean, we talked about how sudden it seemed that he was scheduled to be part of a White House press room briefing with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin until the president's tweet caught apparently even the White House press office by surprise.
Oh, that's right, Anderson. I talked to a senior administration official earlier today who said they were essentially running around trying to figure out what was going on after the president's tweet about John Bolton. But you're right. I mean, in addition to John Bolton being listed as participating in this briefing with reporters earlier today, he was spotted outside the West Wing talking on the phone, seemingly unaware of what was about to happen, that he wasn't going to be involved with his administration any longer. But at that briefing with the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, I asked the Treasury Secretary whether or not this national security team is basically a mess right now in light of all of these departures and all this turnover you just laid out a few moments ago, and here's what he had to say. Is this national security team a mess?
Absolutely not. That's the most ridiculous question I've ever heard of. Let me just say, the national security team, which is what you asked, consists of the national security advisor, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, myself, the Chief of Staff, and many others.
Now, Anderson, I went on to ask the Treasury Secretary whether or not it is hazardous to your future in the administration to disagree with the president. He said that's not true. But perhaps the most telling thing that we saw during that briefing earlier today, Anderson, was not something that was said. It was the smiles on the faces of the Secretary of State and the Treasury Secretary. Typically, when somebody like a national security advisor leaves an administration, not only are they not taking questions from reporters about all of this, they're certainly not smiling about it. But in the words of one administration official I spoke with earlier today about all of this, John Bolton did not have a lot of defenders left in this administration. Anderson.
Jim Acosta, thanks very much. Now, an exclusive conversation with Susan Rice. She served first as UN ambassador and later as national security advisor for more than 3 years in the Obama administration. And she's author of a new book out next month called Tough Love, My Story of the Things Worth Fighting For. I spoke to her just before airtime. Ambassador Rice, when you heard the news about John Bolton's departure, were you surprised at all, given the turnover and the turmoil in the White House?
I was surprised by the timing of it because it came with little notice, but I wasn't surprised that we might come to this point because it seemed quite clear that in many respects, John Bolton and his policy interests and his policy positions deviated quite dramatically from President Trump's. And there have been a number of stories recently about how Bolton had been excluded or attempted to have been excluded from very important meetings where any national security advisor would rightly be present. So the fact that the rift came to the fore and then resulted in his departure itself was not such a surprise. I think the timing was. And recall, we're not only just days after the Afghan debacle, but we're on the eve now of the United Nations General Assembly, where foreign policy will again come to the fore. So it's an awkward time to have a no national security advisor or a brand new national security advisor.
As you know, CNN's reporting is that the scheduled and canceled, I guess, I don't know if it's summit or meeting with the Taliban at Camp David was the final straw between the president and Bolton, combined with Bolton reportedly criticizing the whole thing to journalists in the past few days. I mean, do you agree with Bolton on the substance of opposing that meeting, or what do you make of the idea of the meeting? Because it also gets to the point you made earlier, which is it shouldn't be surprising, given that Bolton's well-known positions from being on Fox News, if nothing else, should have been known to the president before he was hired, or would have been known to the president before he was hired?
Well, Anderson, should have been known, absolutely. Whether they were known or whether the president cared at the time or only cared when it seemed to thwart his agenda is hard to judge. But clearly, John Bolton had some very strong views on a number of issues, most of which I disagree with him on. For example, Venezuela, his approach to Iran. But on Afghanistan, I think he had a very valid point. It was an appalling judgment to invite the Taliban, responsible for the deaths of thousands of Americans, to Camp David when they hadn't agreed to end the conflict with the Afghan government, much less talk to the Afghan government.
So what happens now? I mean, the president's obviously fine with having people fill jobs in an acting capacity. He's fine not having a press secretary doing, daily briefings with a press corps. He's happy just kind of handling it himself on the way to and from a helicopter. It seems like he's happy not necessarily having a lot of close advisors. He seems to feel he can negotiate with Kim Jong-un on his own and Vladimir Putin on his own. So what happens next? I mean, how does the next national security advisor do his or her job?
These are two different things. So the broader problem we have is that the national security process has completely broken down. John Bolton did not convene the national security principles, the cabinet-level officials who are supposed to weigh in and collectively make recommendations to the president on anything like a regular basis. He arrogated so much authority to himself to the exclusion of his counterparts. Decisions were not worked through with the rigor and the care that they normally are and that they need to be. Add to that we have a president who could care less, it seems, about history, about analysis, about the rigor of going through various options and weighing their prospective risks and benefits. He's making policy on the fly, often changing his mind in midstream. It's an extremely dangerous situation.
So you're saying the system has really broken down?
It's proving it has broken down. And what President Trump is proving is that even if we had a system that was performing as it should, he could care less, and he would throw the results out the window. So we've got two problems. We've got a dysfunctional national security process and a president who himself, by virtue of the way he governs and plays his role as commander-in-chief, is putting our interests at grave risk in many different contexts.
Just lastly, I want to get your reaction to today's new CNN reporting that President Trump has privately and repeatedly expressed opposition to the use of foreign intelligence from covert sources overseas. According to multiple senior officials who served under the president, he reportedly fears those assets, those covert assets, will damage his relationships with foreign leaders, and essentially he doesn't trust the intelligence. I mean, it is, assuming that is true, that is seems to be a remarkable breach from, I mean, that's what that's what overseas operatives for the CIA
it's crazy.
do. I mean,
Anderson, call it what it is. It's crazy,
Yes.
okay? Our adversaries are using espionage, including human intelligence assets, against us every day. For the United States to unilaterally disarm and say, well, we're going to renounce one of the most useful forms of intelligence collection against our most committed adversaries is foolish, to put it mildly. And so, for the president to put his own self-interest, it seems, above the national interest of the United States, above the national security of the United States, which in so many instances, this just being the latest, seems to be his pattern, is extraordinarily dangerous and detrimental to our security, to our standing in the world, and to our ability to protect ourselves, which is what intelligence is about. Intelligence is about protecting the American people from our adversaries.
Ambassador Rice, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Anderson.
Well, tonight, coming up, two more takes on this and the breaking news. Max Boot and Fareed Zakaria join us for that. And later, the numbers and expert insight as results are just now starting to come in from North Carolina's 9th, where the president was campaigning just yesterday. Before the break, you heard former National Security Advisor Susan Rice's take on John Bolton's firing, essentially that it reflects the dysfunctionality of what is supposed to be a carefully structured system for ensuring that any president, gets the best possible advice, especially when getting good advice is a matter of life and death. Now, the national security process, she says, has completely broken down in this White House. There's also the question of policy differences, including Jim Acosta's reporting that Ambassador Bolton, according to a source close to the White House, had been concerned the president is too generous with dictators. And in the words of this source, Trump caves, he gives them way too much. I want to talk about Fareed Zakaria, host of Fareed Zakaria GPS Sundays on CNN, and CNN Global Affairs analyst Max Boot. How big of a deal is Bolton's departure?
Well, it's a big deal because it's symptomatic, really, of a breakdown in a policy process. See, sometimes you do have situations where presidents come into office. They often haven't thought a lot about foreign policy. They develop a foreign policy view as they go through crises, and then they notice that some of their advisors are actually not in sync with them. That's a normal process. Ronald Reagan went through 6 national security advisors. Here, it's puzzling because Trump's views on foreign policy are well known. I mean, he basically wants to end those wars. He wants to negotiate. Bolton's views are very well known. Trump must have had the recorder on mute during the Fox News broadcast that John Bolton was on, because Bolton is a super hawk, very aggressive, wants to, bomb every country, doesn't want to do any of the peace deals. What was Trump thinking when he hired him? So it's the dysfunction at the heart of the Trump White House, which is, why are these people being hired? They don't seem to agree with the president. He doesn't seem to respect them. Really, there is a kind of weird, what is going on here?
Max, you wrote a piece today basically saying that John Bolton, I want to get the headline right, John Bolton was bad, his departure may be worse.
Right. I'm no fan of John Bolton, and I think he did a lot of bad things, especially in destroying the NSC, destroying the interagency process, not being a good steward of the process and representing different viewpoints. But I do think that he was in some ways a useful check on Trump, and you might actually say that they were kind of a useful check on each other, because they're both men with very peculiar ideas, but kind of contrasting peculiar ideas, because Trump is basically wants to make deals with everybody, and he doesn't really care about the content of the deal. He really just wants a Nobel Peace Prize, whereas Bolton wants to go out and bomb all these countries, Iran and North Korea and others. So Trump served as a check on Bolton, preventing him from actually starting wars with Iran and North Korea. But Bolton also served as a check on Trump, preventing him from giving away the House to North Korea or the Taliban and making these horrible concessions that would have resulted in very bad deals. So, I mean, I think overall, Bolton's legacy is not a good one. He didn't really achieve a lot, but I think there was a kind of a silver lining to the dark cloud.
Fareed, how difficult is it going to be for this White House to actually find another national security advisor who was, somebody of weight?
You've already been through more turnover in these 2.5 years in this White House than any. This is history making in terms of the number of people who have left. They also are dismissed in an incredibly curt, dismissive fashion. If you just look at the way Trump gets rid of people, he never gives them any dignity. He never allows them to say that they resigned. And then you have the puzzle of his views, which change all the time. So the people who are left, I think, are for the most part second-tier people who could never have gotten these jobs, who will contort themselves ideologically to accept whatever whatever his position of the week is. And that's not a very good mechanism to ensure that you have the best and the brightest people. There are a few exceptions to that, but by and large, what you see are people who are essentially willing to do anything to hold those jobs. And these are the most important jobs in the country. Surely that's not how we want to fill the administration.
And in terms of what they actually have to do, Anderson, Trump expects everybody to basically be a yes man or woman, but that's very hard because his views change all the time. I mean, you saw that just in the last week where he suddenly got a brainstorm, let's invite the Taliban to Camp David. And then he decided, let's not invite the Taliban to Camp David. And then he was sore at Bolton for disagreeing with him about inviting the Taliban, even though he ultimately decided that was not a good idea. So he basically wants somebody like Mike Pence who will agree with him if he invites the Taliban and agree with him if he disinvites the Taliban. And so you have to be prepared to stay in Trump's good graces. You have to basically be able to take both sides of any position at any time.
Which Pompeo certainly seems, I mean, he seems to be willing to go along with whatever the president wants.
I think Pompeo is playing his own longer-term game. It seems that he has political ambitions of his own. He understands this is an extraordinary platform, and he understands that the way you keep your good graces with Donald Trump is you constantly praise Donald Trump. All the reporting about the internal meetings between Pompeo and Trump are, Pompeo is almost slavish in his praise of Trump. And I think Max is exactly right. You just have to make sure that you never disagree so sharply that you couldn't be caught on the wrong side. Because we really have an extraordinary situation where, think about this, John Bolton has been fired because he didn't want to make a deal with the Taliban, the position that Donald Trump now holds. Right. So he was fired for taking the position that Trump eventually came to.
Fareed Zakaria, thank you, Max Boot, as well. Still ahead tonight, as votes are counted in that special congressional election in North Carolina, there's a new CNN poll out showing the latest on President Trump's approval rating. For the president, the news is not good. All the details on that poll ahead. As we mentioned at the top of the program, returns are being counted in an important special election tonight in North Carolina's 9th district. Both Democrats and Republicans are watching closely to see what, if anything, it might say about 2020. Let's go to John King, who's been looking at the numbers. John?
And at the moment, Anderson, the early numbers quite interesting. The Democrat, Dan McCready, winning the race so far. About 22% of the vote counted. That's a pretty healthy lead for the Democrat in a district the Republicans have held since 1963. In a district the president in 2016 carried by 12 points. So this is a big deal. Let's go quickly through this. The biggest county is Mecklenburg County over here. Let me bring it over to here. This is the Charlotte area here. Charlotte's not in the district, but the suburbs here. Dan McCready is ahead. Back in 2016. President Trump carried this part of the district, so that's a big deal. This is about 30% of the vote. You move over to Union County, the second biggest county in the district. Bishop is winning, but not by the size of the margin President Trump did. You come to the other end of the district over here in the Fayetteville suburbs, Cumberland County, McCready up again. This is a test, Anderson. Remember, President Trump underperformed in the suburbs in 2016. Republicans got crushed in the suburbs in 2018. That's why Nancy Pelosi is Speaker. If this holds up, and it's early, just 23% of the vote, you'll see more Republican retirements, and you'll have the Trump campaign saying, wow, we went there, the president went there, the vice president went there. Why didn't our voters turn out?
All right, 23% of the vote. John, we're going to check back with you very shortly. Obviously, watching that very closely. There's also brand new polling, CNN poll out tonight with results that are troubling for President Trump. According to the poll, 6 in 10 Americans do not believe President Trump deserves to be reelected. Only 36% of those who polled believe the president should deserve a second term. As far as overall approval ratings, almost as bad. Only 39% approve of the way the president is handling the job. 55% do not. Interestingly, the poll also shows the president's approval rating on the economy has dipped below 50% for the first time since early this year. I want to talk about it with David Axelrod, who was obviously a key political advisor of President Obama and is a CNN senior political commentator, and Kirsten Powers, a columnist for USA Today and a CNN political analyst. David, I mean, the economy has obviously been the president's biggest asset for re-election. For some people, his only asset. I'm wondering what you make of the new numbers.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's plenty of bad news in this poll. There's very little good news in this poll for him. The economy is particularly important because this was going to be the bulwark. This was going to be the thing that was going to carry him to victory. And historically, if you have a good economy, the incumbent president generally wins. And so he was counting on this. The economy has been flagging lately, showing some signs of distress, and so are his numbers here. In April, he had a 15-point positive margin in his ratings, 56% on the economy. Now he's down, I think 48, 49, but he's significantly below where he was. This has to be concerned, but there are all kinds of other numbers. He carried independent voters by 2 points in 2016. Only 29% of independent voters say that he deserves re-election here. And you look throughout the numbers, only one number would give him some encouragement, and that is voters who say they are most enthusiastic give him a slightly higher rating, but still underwater. So if you're sitting over there in Trump headquarters and you're looking at numbers like these, you realize you've got a very tough road to hoe ahead of you.
Kirsten, I mean, voters don't know who the president obviously is going to be running against at this point. I'm wondering how, meaningful a poll like this is at this stage.
Right. I mean, I think that's probably the most important point, is that elections it's a zero-sum game. It's between two people. And so it's not just about how you feel about the incumbent. It's also about how you feel about the person who's running against him. And so it will depend a lot on who the Democrats choose. It will depend on how the Republicans define that person. If they are able to, for example, define that person as being a socialist, how does that play with voters? And so that changes the dynamic. That said, as David said, these are not numbers that the White House is excited about. There's no way that they can be excited about this. You look at this poll, and Trump has done absolutely nothing to change the opinion of people in a positive direction from the day he came into office. The trajectory is not good, and he has obviously doubled down on this base strategy, but independents matter, and you look at this poll and you can see that he's not moving them into his camp.
Yeah, I mean, David, I'm wondering if on the Democratic side, if they look at this poll and if that has any message for the Democratic Party about what sort of a candidate, I mean, the fact that the number among independents is so low, does that make Democrats start to think, we need to pick somebody who's going to be able to pick up those independents?
It's an interesting question. I don't know that voters make those kinds of strategic decisions. There is a focus on who can beat Trump. I don't know if they drill down into the numbers that way. But one thing is absolutely for certain, Kirsten touched on it. If you're in the Trump camp, you realize you have to annihilate the Democratic nominee in order to win this election. You're not going to win this election. Most incumbents have to make it a comparative process. But in this case, the notion that he is going to, having languished in the near 40% level for his whole presidency, the only president in history to do that, his strategy is going to be to destroy the Democratic nominee. And, Democrats need to think, at least those in sort of policy-making positions, endorsing positions, are you going to choose a nominee who makes it easier for Trump to do that or not?
Yeah, David Axelrod, Kirsten Powers, thanks very much. I appreciate it. Coming up, we're going to go back to John King with new developments in the North Carolina race. Stay tuned. I want to go back to John King now because the vote totals are growing in North Carolina's 9th congressional district race. So what's the latest?
24%, Anderson, up right now. The Democrat Dan McCready continues to lead by a pretty healthy margin over the Republican Dan Bishop. Again, this has been a Republican district since 1963. It was a Republican district for President Trump by 12 points just 3 years ago. So everyone's watching this. The Trump campaign, the Democrats are watching this as well, in part to see if the suburban retreat, the suburban revolt against President Trump continues. Let's move over here first to Mecklenburg County. I'll move this up a little bit. Charlotte is not in the district, but a good chunk of the Charlotte suburbs and the exurbs are. You see this blue, that's for Dan McCready. 60%, 39%. That is a healthy lead. I just want to tell you why that's so important. Again, the suburbs have been moving away from the Republican Party during the Trump years. This is now tonight. Let's go back to the presidential race. President Trump, it was close, but President Trump carried this part of Mecklenburg County, the part of the county that is in the 9th district. President Trump held on 3 years ago. As of tonight, as we watch the votes, Dan McCready winning there by a pretty healthy margin at the moment. We're still counting at the margin. Just want to move over here. Union County, the second biggest county in this district. Dan Bishop's winning in a district the Republican needs to carry. That's good news for him, right? That's about, what, 16 points? Well, it's good news for him, but go back to the presidential race. That's 30 points. President Trump won the second largest county in this district big time. Dan Bishop fighting for it tonight. Another warning sign for Republicans as we watch. Let me come to the other end of the district. The third largest county in the district is here, Robeson County. You see President Trump won it by about 4 or 5 points. When you go back to 2016, it's blue tonight for Dan McCready in the early returns. That makes the Democrats happy. One more. This is the other bookend. The Charlotte suburbs on the western end, the Fayetteville suburbs on the eastern end. Dan McCready with a pretty healthy lead right there on this end of the district. Again, is the suburban revolt continuing? President Trump, just barely, but he carried this part of the district 3 years ago. If you're a Democrat and you're looking at this map, you're starting to feel a little better optimistic about tonight. And if Dan McCready can hold on, Anderson, the Democrats would be much more optimistic looking forward into 2020, thinking what happened in 2018, the suburban revolt that made Nancy Pelosi Speaker. The question is it growing? Is it continuing? If this goes blue tonight, the answer will be yes.
Yeah. We're going to check back in with you, John, because obviously we want to watch this very closely. Here with me now, CNN political director David Chalian and CNN's chief political correspondent Dana Bash. Obviously, David, too early at this point, 24, 25% of the vote in, but certainly Democrats are watching.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. We should just start by saying Democrats should not be playing in this district. I mean, the reality is the DNA of this district that Donald Trump won by 12 points is that it is a reliably Republican district. Now, there are two things at play, right? There are the demographic trends overall, as John was just talking about. The suburbs had started trending Democratic to begin with, and Donald Trump is the other factor which put that on a turbocharge because of the revolt that you just heard John talking about. They are watching closely. They do like some of the numbers combined with the early vote that they were really happy with before this election. But I will also just note one other thing as we look at this. Dan McCready is also a very specific kind of candidate for this district, a veteran, a moderate, not running against Donald Trump, running on health care and other issues. So I do also wonder that if the Democrats win, not only will it say, hey, that 2018 Trump backlash continues, but in terms of impact to the 2020 presidential race, will Democrats start to have a conversation about, well, what is the kind of Democrat that can actually flip
this conversation, obviously, Dana, that's been going on for quite a while in the Democratic Party.
It has been, and you know, so far in the primaries, or you know, even in just the discussions about the positions that a lot of the presidential candidates have, they're being fueled, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, by the progressive wing, saying we have to stand up for what we believe in. But I just want to echo what David was saying. We've heard some spin from Republicans today, senior Republicans in Washington who, you know, run the House, saying, oh, this is a swing district. This is not a swing district. This is not, should not be a competitive district at all. The fact that the President of the United States went down there, that his campaign is pushing to win for a random Republican.
Trump was there just yesterday, and Vice President Pence
and the Vice President, and Donald Trump Jr. was there last week. It's all about stopping the bleeding. If they win, it's for them a nothing burger. If they lose, it is a huge, huge problem.
David, I mean, the president has tried to continue to paint Democrats, obviously, as socialists, communists, which might work for the base, but I mean, clearly among moderate voters in the suburbs, here that doesn't seem to be working.
Well, especially against this candidate in particular, right? Whether or not that may work on a national level in presidential race, we'll see. You just heard David Axelrod talking about the Trump campaign mission is going to have to be to annihilate the Democratic opponent in 2020. Certainly the socialism piece will be a part of that. But you're right, Anderson. He was saying last night in North Carolina, this is the anti-American left. I just think what you see in our poll out today, what you see in some of these returns right now, and we'll see as the results continue to come in, independent voters, suburban voters, this is a group that the president has pushed away from the Republican Party, and there is nothing in that argument yet that has brought them back into the fold.
And one of the things is we have been so focused on the suburban part of this district because it has been such a telltale of what happened in the House, and it was clearly a revolt against the president and independents moving away, as David was saying. But the other part that John was showing, the other part of the district, is rural. So it's a bit of a mix. Now, the Trump people will say, and they're not wrong, that if you're trying to get Republican rural voters out, not only when Donald Trump isn't on the ticket, but during a special election at a random time, kind of at the end of the summer, beginning of the, of the fall of the school year, it's not the same. But it is going to be interesting to see if those rural voters are going to be animated by a President Trump visit, because that's the whole reason he went down there, to get those voters out just as much as he is trying to get them out in the suburbs.
Yeah, I mean, David, is it a sign of confidence that President Trump goes to North Carolina the day before, or is it a sign of concern?
Well, it is a sign of concern. If it was a lost cause, they wouldn't put him there, right? Because although the president would be chomping at the bit to try to go, because we know that he thinks he can actually deliver these results. But Anderson, what is a more precious resource than the president's time? And so, well,
really?
Okay, your fair point, executive time. The president and the vice president, though, both going down there on the eve of the election, that is not willy-nilly. That is because they want to put their chips in. They understand how important it is psychologically to the political environment to keep this in Republican
And maybe
hands.
a better way to say it is maybe time, not time, but capital, presidential capital.
Right. Dana Bash, thank you very much. David Chalian, thanks. We're going to continue to watch this. We're going to get another quick update from John King next. Welcome back. We are watching numbers, what could be a leading indicator of the 2020 election, the race in North Carolina's 9th congressional district. Things are shifting a bit again. Let's go back to John King for another update. John?
A little bit closer, Anderson. We're 28% reporting now in the 9th district of North Carolina. The Democrats still ahead, 2.5, 3 points there as we watch the votes come in. A lot of the early votes, we know Democrats had the advantage in early voting, so the early votes favored the Democrat. Now as votes come in, the Republicans got a little bit closer. But still, if you're the Democrats and you're watching the map right now, you're happy with what you see. Number one, move over to Mecklenburg County. Let me move it up a little bit. About a third of the vote here, only 2% of the vote in, the Democratic leading by a large margin. If that margin for Dan McCready holds up in Mecklenburg County, he's probably on his way to a victory, but we'll see as more votes come in. It's key. We're early in the night, close race right now. You move over here, Union County, county number 2 in terms of population in this district. The Republican is winning by nowhere near the margin President Trump carried this county when he won it by 12 points in 2016. Move over to the other end of the district. Here's where your population is. County number 3 in terms of population. The Democrat ahead by a pretty good margin. Just a little context here. President Trump won this in the presidential race. It was close in Robeson County, but Dan McCready at the moment putting up a pretty healthy lead. That's 20 points right there. Again, watch this as more of the vote comes in. Last but not least, the 4th largest county includes the Fayetteville suburbs, the Charlotte suburbs, the Fayetteville suburbs. If that stays blue, Democrats will be in good spirits tonight. But Anderson, we got some counting to do.
Yeah. All right, John. We'll keep watching. Thanks very much. Kind of want to check in with Chris, see what he's working on for Cuomo Prime Time at the top of the hour. Chris?
We'll be following the election because, look, it is our best look to date at the actual state of play heading into the next set of elections. And they should win. Republicans should win in this district. What we saw that makes it an interesting race is what happened in the midterms, that you saw this kind of 12-point margin that could be closed because of feelings about this president. That will play into our coverage of the new CNN poll that echoes the ABC poll that came out about this president having flagging support, especially surrounding concerns about the economy and his mouth. We're going to go from that into Alyssa Milano, who is here tonight, fresh off of her meeting with Senator Ted Cruz, a meeting that I thought wouldn't happen, happened on Facebook Live, and we'll talk to her about what she thinks it did to advance the ball on access to weapons.
All right, Chris, 8 minutes from now. We'll see you then. Spies are practiced in the art of deception, so how does anyone ever learn to trust them? Author Malcolm Gladwell talks about that in CNN's exclusive story about a Russian spy extraction next in a clip from my upcoming interview with Malcolm about his latest book, Talking to Strangers, out today.
To make sense of somebody.
We end tonight with a clip from a conversation I had earlier today with author Malcolm Gladwell, whose new book was just released today. The book is called Talking to Strangers, What We Should Know About the People We Don't Know. If you've ever wondered why hardly anyone ever realized Bernie Madoff was running a Ponzi scheme, or why Italian police arrested Amanda Knox even though there was no real evidence against her, there's some intriguing answers in Malcolm's new book. If you think you can tell if someone is lying when you talk to them, or you think you can judge a person based on a face-to-face encounter with them, how they act or speak in a conversation, you'll quickly learn that you can't. According to Gladwell, we misunderstand people we interact with all the time, and that has big ramifications for how we get along with people, as well as ramifications for judges and juries and police and world leaders who have to make important decisions based on false assumptions. Gladwell also wrote about some fascinating real-life spy stories in his book and how those spies were able to fool so many people for so long, especially trained people. I started by asking him about the story that CNN broke, the extraction of a top Russian intelligence asset back in 2017.
You're a big spy fan. I don't know if you've been following the latest about this high-level Russian source who was exfiltrated. As a spy fan, I mean, that's gold.
Yeah. No, it's the, all spy stories are alike in one, many of them are alike in one significant way, which is that everyone is always in the dark about the spy, right? So this one's perfect. First of all, he's been there for years, and the Russians...
As much as 10 years or more.
Yeah, maybe 10 years. Russians haven't found him out yet, or maybe they just did. But basically, he went a decade without being detected. Right. And then when we try and bring him out early, he doesn't want to go, and then we start to think, oh, he's a double agent. So we're not even sure. No one knows who the guy is. He is a complete mystery. Right. Like it's extraordinary that... I tell in my book 2 spy stories, but literally I pick them at random because, like I say, they all have this basic. And the other thing that's fascinating about it is that is in spy novels. Spy novels are all about how brilliant the spy is, right? The spy is a mastermind, an evil genius, a master of disguise, a this, or that, the other thing. It's this James Bond idea. The
And you read a lot of spy novels.
All of them. If it has the word spy in it, I read it.
All of them.
But in real life, the spy's success is not due to the spy's genius. It's due to everyone else's blindness. Like, the spy novels all have it backwards. So most spies are actually really lame. The reason I tell these spy stories is I'm really interested in this notion of why is it so easy for human beings to be deceived?
As a reporter, you like to think when you're talking to somebody, you can get a sense of if they're honest or not. But I mean, I got to say, after reading your book, I sort of feel like, do we really know who we're talking to?
I don't think we do.
It's a fascinating conversation. You can see the full 1 hour interview with Malcolm Gladwell in the coming weeks. We'll bring that to you. The book, Talking to Strangers, is out now. News continues right now. I want to hand over to Chris for Cuomo Primetime. Chris?
All right, Anderson, it's an exciting night. I am Chris Cuomo, and welcome to Primetime. Tonight matters, my friends. We should get our best look yet at the state of play for the 2020 election by seeing what happens in North Carolina's special elections for Congress tonight. Now, you have to look at these elections in light of the two polls that just came out, ABC and CNN, both out today, showing that the president has slipped in support. The economy, a concern. Confidence in him, flagging. So, the vote that is being counted right now will show what does that translate into in a district that should be a layup for Republicans, North Carolina's 9th district. We got all the big shots here. John King working the magic wall. Our top team here to make me look smarter and tell us what is at stake in this tally. Plus tonight, Alyssa Milano is here to talk about her face-to-face meeting with Ted Cruz on gun violence that ended just hours ago. What do you think? Can the celebrity and the senator put politics aside and find any common ground? It's a turbulent Tuesday. Let's get after it. All right, the voters in North Carolina's 9th district have just had their say at the polls. Again, the GOP should win the seat. Trump won it by a dozen points. So did Romney. But doubts about this president gave Democrats, if you look at the numbers, about a 12-point swing in midterm races in some red districts. Will we see more slippage tonight? This is important enough that the president was down there last night rallying the MAGA troops. So, to campaign for Dan Bishop. He is the Republican running, but let's be honest, it's not about him. This is about a proxy for the president. Dan McCready, as you see on your screen, is the Democrat. It is very close. It has been getting closer. It should not be a surprise if the Republican wins, but we want to see by how much. What could happen here in light of what happened in that 2018 earlier midterm wave? Now, in that district, remember why the 9th district matters right now, why we have to have a special election. There were allegations of voter fraud. McCready lost, I think, by like hundreds of votes or something, or close to that, something like that. Very small the last time. The person he was running against is out. They needed a new election. So let's bring in John King to give us the state of play. What is the latest, my friend?
The latest is Dan McCready, the Democrat, continuing to lead in this race. I want to emphasize we're still counting. 38% reporting in the 9th district, as you noted. Again, we shouldn't be having this conversation tonight, Chris. This should be a rock-solid Republican district. They've held it since 1963. President Trump, as you noted, carried it by 12 points. But will 2018 carry over? Meaning, will the Republican Party's problems in the suburbs carry over? Will presidential visits prove to not have the juice? The president was just there last night, as you said. Will they not have the juice? Let's take a look at some of the district here. I want to start over here in Mecklenburg County. This is the largest part of the district. Now, the county actually goes out a bit further. Hillary Clinton carried Mecklenburg County in 2016, but Donald Trump carried this part. I want to go back in time and look. President Trump, then candidate Trump, carried this part of the district, the part of Mecklenburg County that is in North Carolina 9. Not by a lot, but the president carried it. What are we seeing tonight so far? Dan McCready, the Democrat, winning it by a lot at the moment. But remember this, only 4% in Mecklenburg County. As we go through these other counties, so far it looks like this number, when it goes up, can McCready hold a lead anything like that in the biggest part of the district? That is the defining question at the moment as we move through the rest of the race. Union County is the second largest county. We're up to 67% there. You look at that and you say, whoa, Dan Bishop doing what he needs to do, right? He's winning a Republican county by 20 points. That's not bad, but again, margins matter in politics. Can't compare a presidential race and a House race, but you can say President Trump won this county by 30 points. Republicans need these more rural counties. This is a test. The president was right there telling his people, I need you, come out. At the moment, as we look at the results here, Dan Bishop's winning, but maybe not by the margin he needs. Again, we'll keep counting the votes. Let's move to the other end of the district, Chris. Third largest county is right here, Robeson County. Dan McCready winning by a pretty healthy margin, only 26%. Let's watch. The early vote tends to come in for the Democrats. Then we watch the day of election voting, see if the Republican catches up. But again, you're comparing this here in a district Republicans have held forever. President Trump won this county by about 5 points. The Republican, President Trump, won this county by about 5 points, 4 or 5 points in the presidential election. The Democrat is winning it right now by 20 points. If you're in Republican headquarters, that concerns you. And lastly, we talked about the suburbs, right? Mecklenburg County, the Charlotte suburbs, the close-in exurb areas, they've been moving away from the Republican Party. President Trump has put that on steroids. Will it happen here, too, in the Fayetteville suburbs? Dan McCready winning 12 points, if you look at that, 11, 12 points right there. Again, back in time, President Trump carried this part of the district, just barely, but he carried it. Margins matter in close races, and if you're looking at this map as it fills in right now, Chris, 38%, so we got about 40% of the vote in. The Democrat is ahead. If the Democrats even close tonight, even if the Republican wins, and it's close, Republicans are going to have jitters. If this holds up and Dan McCready is the next congressman from North Carolina 9, the president's going to be questioning, can I get my voters out? And you're going to see a lot more Republican retirements.
Margins matter in elections. Wins matter even more. Is there any population center that you're going to be watching closely as the rest of the vote comes in that would be responsible for any big move?
Yeah, two, actually, and I'm going to start again over here. You look where the people are, right? And this is the largest part of the district here. Again, Mecklenburg County. That's where Charlotte is. Charlotte is not in the district, but the close-in suburbs are, and then these more exurban areas right here, only 4% right now. So the largest piece of unaccounted for votes, uncounted votes, are right here in the battleground part of this now battleground, never before, but now battleground district. Again, Republicans have held this district since 1963. That I'm calling it a battleground tonight tells you everything you need to know about the climate. This is the largest unknown at the moment. As this vote number goes up, they left some polls open because of people in line. I suspect that's why that number's low, and the counting is a little slow right now. This is the one to watch here. And then again, just to come to the other end of the district, you look here, this was Republican in the presidential race. If Dan McCready can hold on by that kind of a margin, it just tells you that it's not just in the suburbs, it's starting to stretch out into the rural areas as well. What does that tell you? It tells you that even though the president went, the vice president went, and Donald Trump Jr. went, if this county over here, now at 26%, if that stays blue, the Trump campaign is going to be thinking, what do we need to do a better job getting our people out?
All right, anything you see that swings your interest, let me know, and I'll come right back to you, okay?
I'll give you a wave.
All right, so let's bring in the experts here. We have David Chalian and Dana Bash. One, Chalian, is there any hype alert going on at this and that? Well, it doesn't really matter that much. Oh, it's just because it's happening tonight. You know, in reviewing for tonight, McCready's running the same race he ran last time. Yep. He was very close. There were allegations of fraud. They had to rerun the race. Dan Bishop seems to be a solid candidate for the GOP. All the buzz is about what this means for the president. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, they had to rerun the race because the North Carolina Board of Election refused to certify it because of those fraud issues that occurred there. You are right. Bishop is running the same race. He's running on health care. He's putting his bio forward, his veteran status forward. He's not doing the Trump bashing thing, right? Because this is a really red district. So he's running like all those Democrats that ran in 2018 that delivered the House majority to Speaker Pelosi. So they're following that playbook. You are right to note Bishop, the Republican, doesn't have the stink of the fraud issue on him the way Mark Harris did, right? The previous guy that was there. So Bishop is a Republican that perhaps fits this district better. I will tell you one thing, though. He does have the bathroom bill. You remember that famous bill back in North? And that, where John is talking about the suburbs and independence, that has a potential to turn some voters off that perhaps Bishop needs tonight.
And, you know, I was looking for an indication, Dana, that this really isn't about the president. The voters there are upset that there seemed to be something fraudulent. The person who was running at the time had a horrible set of explanations for how they hired this person who was known for monkeying with votes.
Certified.
Right. So, but again, Dan Bishop is a different person. He's seen as a high character person. He does have that culture war mark on his side. Which voters there, you look at registration in North Carolina, they're more Democrats, but those are blue dog Democrats. So if it's 2 points, they need some recounting, the Republican wins, is it a win is a win is a win, or is it something else?
Look, a win is a win is a win. The fact that we are talking about this is a big deal. I mean, you asked David if there are, you know, the expectation games, if they're playing it big time in Washington. Steve Scalise, the majority whip, said today that this is a swing district. This is not a swing. If he considers this a swing district, I want him to show us what
When's
a
the last
safe
time a
district
Democrat
is.
won?
1963. 1963. So that's kind of a joke. But you know how this goes in politics. If the Republicans win, as they should, based on the history of this district, they're going to breathe a sigh of relief, and they should still look into the numbers and to the voters and to the messages and what this does mean going forward for 2020. If the Democrats win, forget it. I mean, this is going to be a 5-alarm fire looking at 2020 because, yes, this is potentially one of several, as you mentioned at the top of the show, suburban districts that Trump won that could potentially go to the Democrats. But this is as ruby and as red as we've seen even on real election day in 2018.
And Chris, remember, North Carolina, that's going to be a big battleground state in 2020. So I know this is just one district, but never mind to try to extrapolate it fully nationally for President Trump. He needs North Carolina. Right. And if we're starting to see some erosion tonight, that is going to be a big problem just in the map to 270 for Trump.
Right, especially on the same day that they're trying to convince themselves that two separate polls that came out aren't true. You get a result that goes against you. It's a problem.
We'll see.
Let me take a quick break. Stay with me. Do me a favor. Harry will spell out for us the Wizard of Odds about what's going on in the polling and why we're looking at it in tandem with this election. The Wizard of Odds would tell us who is not as enthusiastic about this president. What does it mean for this election tonight? What does it mean for 2020? The Wiz. Nice shirt. Next. President Trump just claimed that, quote, nobody's ever done a better job than I'm doing as president. Now, why would he say something that screams of such insecurity? I'll tell you why. A new CNN poll. The special election in North Carolina is a big deal because it will be a test of what we see in the numbers that show a slippage of support at the wrong time. What does the Wizard of Odds, Harry Enton, see here? Perspective, please.
Okay, here is this perspective, and I will give it to you. Look, we have a latest CNN poll, President Trump's approval rating at 39%. What's important here, take a look at this trend going back to April. 43, 43, 43, 40, 39. He's dropped 4 points from April to September. Now, you might say to yourself, that's one poll, but take a look at this. I think this is rather important. We have an ABC News Washington Post poll. Take a look at this. From late June or early July, he was at 44% back then, but take a look now. Late August, early September, he's dropped 6 points. CNN, we have that 4-point drop during that same period. Gallup, a 5-point drop during that same period. So we're seeing that across the board, that the president's dropping by mid-single digits. And of course, the president has had to have a pretty steady approval rating. So a 5-point drop is a pretty big drop. Now, here's the real question, of course. Is that translating to the ballot test? Well, as a matter of fact, it is, because take a look at this. Does Donald Trump deserve re-election? Only 36% of Americans say yes at this point. 60% say no. And I think this is rather important, too. Take a look here. This was an earlier poll done by Quinnipiac University. We're seeing the same thing going on here. President Trump's number, 38% to 48% versus all the potential Democratic nominees who are all up at least 9 points over him. Now, let's translate this over to North Carolina's 9th district, because I think this is rather important. Remember, in North Carolina's 9th district, what did we see? We saw in 2016 Donald Trump winning that district by 12 points. The same thing, Mitt Romney won that district by 12 points in 2012. But of course, remember, what did we see back in 2017 to 2018 in the special elections? We saw the average Democrat outperform that 2016 margin by 12 points. And if that, of course, happens tonight, we're going to have a very, very tight race on our hands.
Harry, that was excellent, and thank you. So those are all the numbers. Let's bring back Dana and David here. The why becomes very important. My suggestion is, looking at the crosstabs as available in some of these early polls, the president's mouth is getting in his way. The economy, depending on how you want to look at it, it's hard to look at it and say it's bad. It's pretty easy to look at it and say it's good until you look at it versus the president saying it's the best ever. It's the best for everybody. China, trade, the tariffs, putting pressures on him, fighting with Powell, creating recessionary concerns in the markets. These are all on his mouth, not the metrics.
Or what's not on his mouth. The fact that he is maybe just talking about those issues, not talking about the good news. I mean, there are bruises on the heads of so many Trump campaign people from banging it against the wall because their boss, the president, doesn't use this incredible tool that he has, Twitter, to talk exclusively about the economy, and instead picking fights with, reporters and people in Hollywood and, all kinds of other things that gets in the way of the message. And now that the economy is showing signs of weakness, his opponents are jumping on it, and they are being relentless in talking about the negative signs in the economy. And that is maybe one of the biggest telltale signs. There are lots of them, warning signs for the president in this poll, that he's not yet totally underwater on his approval on the economy, but he's pretty close, and it's as bad as it's been in 7 months, right?
Yeah, and we haven't seen it dip below 50%, his approval on the economy in 7 months. That's where he is now. He took what is an advantage, right? And it's now an even shot for him on the economy. It used to be the strong suit, and now it's even, and you're right to note trade as well. Those numbers are down. He's handling that. Every other issue other than the economy, you see, he doesn't crack 40% approval on any issue except the economy, and now that's an even play. The one thing that is really intriguing to me, Chris, this reelect number, just 60% saying he doesn't deserve reelection. We tested that a couple years ago. It was about the same result. That is what is astonishing to me. We are 2.5 years in. He hasn't added a voter in many ways. You see it across the board. 80% of the country says Donald Trump has changed the country. And of those, more say change for the bad than change for the good, and that has been on the rise, specifically with independents who say change for the bad. These are the kinds of signs when I'm constantly looking for seeing, since his first day in office, where is he adding? And I think these numbers show he's not adding at all.
I'll tell you what, this should be good news for Democrats, but here's what it also means. If he's not growing his tent, and he isn't, that means that whoever is the nominee for the Democrats is going to be getting their butt whooped from day one. It will be a relentless bashing to bring down the opponent. So whoever it is, better be ready for that kind of fight. So that's why we're looking at North Carolina. How much of these polls size up with the reality in actual voting? John King, the man, has new numbers ahead. All right, new numbers. Take a look at this. The Democrat, Dan McCready, just slipped in his lead, all right? You have Dan Bishop up now, 0.5 percentage point. Okay, fine. You can say, well, it's too close to call. You have to look at a race like this in terms of where the votes remain. Open up to Dana and David. We're looking on a laptop here of where the votes remain, and we see that there's not a lot of vote in yet in a couple of places that could mean something to McCready, the Democrat.
Yeah, and we should note, while you were talking, the votes updated, and Bishop is a point ahead now. So he may be taking a lead here. Obviously, we'll see if it holds. But you're right. In Mecklenburg County and in Cumberland County, where Fayetteville is, on the bookends of the district, as John King has been pointing out throughout the night, this is McCready's stronghold areas and their big population centers, and we don't have, that is where most of the vote is out right now. So if he can hold big margins, could potentially start closing that spread.
And look, here's what we do know. We still have about 1/3 of the vote or so to come in, so we'll be watching it. But right now, Bishop has pulled ahead. But this is a district that should have never been a question. What will the ultimate selection be? We'll take you through it and what it means. But right now, let's get to what this whole narrative is about and what the reality is going into this next election cycle. We have Wajahat Ali and David Urban. Waj, it's great to have you. Dave, thank you for being here. So, Dave, let's look at it this way. You guys should win this one, the 9th district tonight. I think it's going to go that way. We'll see. There's still outstanding vote, but it should have never been close. What does it mean to you that it is?
Look, as Dana, you heard earlier, right? Dana talked about it's people banging their head, having some bruises from talking to the president.
How are you looking there? Lower that dome for a second.
Yeah, there you go.
Smooth and pretty.
Some big bruises there from banging on what we should continue to harp on is a great economic message and not lose sight of that, because that's what's going to win and carry these very close districts. Look, the president is still very popular in North Carolina now. He's 51%. I wouldn't read too much into this either way. McCready's an incredibly great candidate, very attractive young guy who's, Marine Corps veteran, Duke, Harvard B School, McKinsey consultant, entrepreneur, very appealing to folks in the suburban areas. And his opponent, Mr. Bishop, there was, as Dana points out, the author of a very controversial bathroom bill, which is very polarizing the state. So, you have two very different candidates running, and at the end of the day, this doesn't have, Donald Trump isn't on the ticket here no matter what we say. He'll be on the ticket in 2020, and we really won't know until then.
Well, but obviously, Waj, the president went down there. He sent the vice president down there. He sent his son down there. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, but they put a lot of attention into this for a reason. Waj, how do you read it?
Yeah, David, I don't got any bumps on my smooth head because I'm not supporting Trump, and a Republican does not have to die on the orange decrepit hill. You can see the signs. This should not be a competitive race. A Republican has held this seat since 1963. And let's just remind the viewers that the only reason we're having a special election is because of alleged ballot fraud committed by a GOP operative. McCready only lost by 1,000. And by the way, he still might eke this out. If you're Republican,
he's a great candidate.
Yeah, and you should be afraid because there's been about a dozen Republicans who say they're going to retire. That includes Will Hurd, which means there's only one African-American Republican congressman left. And so if you look at the 2018 midterms, Donald Trump himself said that was going to be a referendum on Trump. What happened, Cuomo? 40 seats were picked up in a blue wave tsunami. Trump only won 2016 by 78,000 votes across 3 states. He lost to Clinton by 3 million votes. This is not a good sign for Republicans.
But Dave, you know, look, I think you got to look at it in context of the polls. What's the chance, do you think, that this president listens to somebody like you or someone around him? I know he just said, I only follow my own advice, but where they say, listen, if you talk more about the economy doing well, what we want to do with the health care plan to make it more consumer friendly, and you stop running your mouth about all these fights, our poll numbers will go up because he's creating his own problems.
Listen, I don't disagree with you on a lot of that, Chris. Obviously, like as you know, I like to see the president talk about all the positive things, talk about things that unify voters. That you know, politics is about addition and not subtraction. And so, when you talk about things like that, you end up adding to our vote total, not subtracting from it. But you know, Waj pointed out, this is going to be a close election tonight. It's going to be a close election in 2020. It's going to be decided by a handful of states, handful of counties. And you know, to suspect that, you know, and to look at this one district as a predictor of what's going to happen in 2020.
No. It's just a snapshot in light of the polls. Just a snapshot. But Waj, let's flip the challenge, Waj. Sure. Let me flip the script here for a second. Now, here's what we know. Okay, I don't care what happens tonight in this 9th district. It's closer than it should have been. And that's going to make them start talking about what are we doing here message-wise. We just went down there. We thought we had a great rally. It didn't come out the way we wanted. Why? It's going to wind up being that they have figured out that the president can't add to his tent. And that's going to leave one option, and it's his favorite one anyway, Waj, and that is whoever you guys put up, they are going to attack that man or woman from day one. What does that make you think about who you have to put in the position? Because they're not going to argue about single-payer plans. He's going to be going at whoever it is as a bum from day one.
Yeah, Republicans have always done that. Every single Democratic candidate is a flaming socialist. Remember our Muslim brother Barack Hussein Obama, that radical Kenyan socialist who's going to make you pray towards Mecca? Democrats should be aggressive. You're comparing yourself to Trump. Compared to Trump, every single Democratic candidate is a flaming moderate. In that poll you showed, all 7 of them are head-to-head beating Trump right now. Be bold with your agenda. Your policies, your economic policies, your healthcare policies, your climate change policies are far more popular than Donald Trump's policies. Attack, attack, attack. Quit bringing a fork to a gunfight, Democrats. Fight Donald Trump. You can take him on. And this is what I think Donald Trump should do. He should go to Mar-a-Lago and not do anything for an entire year. Don't tweet, don't do anything, just golf, because then he would improve the Republicans' chances of maybe winning.
Waj, so Chris, listen, I love Waj, but you know, I think he's way off the mark on this, right? So you know, I went to Detroit. I was there with you in Detroit, and I listened to the parade of folks trying to run to the left, like decriminalizing the border, allowing felons to vote from prison. I mean things that just aren't popular amongst a wide swath. Steve Bullock, you know, Governor Bullock got up there and said to people, look, we're not going to win with this message, folks. Let's get real.
Well,
I mean,
it's going to be, here's what we know for sure.
General.
And I hope I'm really wrong about this. But I don't think we're going to see in the election what we are able to do here on this show at night, which is you guys don't check a lot of boxes that you agree with, but you do agree with being decent. And I don't think that's going to happen. I think that this is going to be an ugly battle of attrition because the president's going to need that to win. I hope I'm wrong, but we'll see. Dave,
I don't got any bumps on my head, though.
Waj, you got a nice new haircut, though. Don't think I didn't see it.
Look, he's trying to look. He's getting
one
like
of the most beautiful heads in the business. One of the most beautiful heads in the business. He doesn't need the hair,
just like me, Cuomo.
But neither of you can do this. That's the game ender right there. All right, we're going to get right back to this razor-close race in North Carolina in what should be a ruby red district. When we get the numbers, we'll give them to you. But there was some real-time democracy in action. Did you see this? Ted Cruz and Alyssa Milano actually had that meeting. They did it on Facebook live. What was it like between the two? What did it mean? What does it mean for guns in America? Milano's here. The race in the 9th Congressional District in North Carolina is razor close. The Republican is in the lead right now. But remember, Trump won it by a dozen points. This should have been a no-brainer for the Republicans, a layup. All right, that's politics. What about policy? In an era when opposition is what gets rewarded, we saw something noteworthy today. A die-hard conservative senator, Ted Cruz, and a Hollywood liberal activist sat together and discussed the idea of limiting access to weapons. Here's our discussion with Alyssa Milano.
I look at my children and I'm terrified. I don't know how to keep my children safe. For many people in this country, your stance has made you almost like this caricature of a villain. And that's why this meeting was so important for me, because I wanted to be able to look at you in the eye and know that you're really a human with a heartbeat.
Alyssa Milano, thank you for being on Prime Time, as always.
Thank you for the opportunity, as always.
What an interesting day you had. Tell us everything. Tell us everything.
Well, I was here for the last 2 days in D.C. on the Hill advocating with Peter Morley, who is a patient advocate. And today I had a meeting with Senator Cruz on gun violence.
Did you think it was going to happen when you started the Twitter back and forth with him? And the opportunity of a meeting came up almost as a suggestion of like to put up or shut up. Did you think it would ever really happen?
I didn't, and I didn't think it would happen this quickly, because usually when this stuff happens, you say, yes, I can meet you, and then it becomes a back and forth between scheduling and you know, trying to find the time. And if they don't want to meet with you, they usually can't find the time. But luckily, they came back and said, we have a time for you. It's Tuesday at 4:15. I woke up this morning with such an incredible pit in my stomach. I was so nervous. And
why?
Not because of Senator Cruz, but I think the weight of what was possible was weighing on me. You know, look, we have a major, major gun violence problem in this country. And like 90% of Americans, I go to bed every night and I worry that I can't keep my children safe. And I don't know how to keep my children safe. And there's not a worse feeling as a parent. And so I felt like this meeting was important, obviously, to reach across the aisle, to have a civil discussion on this matter, to look at him in the eye and say, you're on the wrong side of this. So I think I just felt the weight of the possibility, really.
So what did you take away on two levels? First, on a human level, what did you see when you looked at Senator Ted Cruz?
I think that he understands the magnitude of the issue right now, especially in regards to mass shootings in this country and the apparent weapon of choice, which is usually the AR-15 assault rifle, in which these killers kill people. I think he understands. I think when I said to him, I said, no 17-month-old baby should ever have shrapnel in her chest in this country. I think he gets it. Now, to understand it and then to have the courage and the fortitude to do something about it are two very, very different things. So I'm cautiously optimistic that he knows the issue and hopeful, I guess, that he's willing to do something about it. You know, he takes a lot of money from the NRA. We all know this. He has been on the wrong side of this issue. But I do understand how fossilized we are as far as parties. And the most important thing, I think, on this issue is that this is not even a bipartisan issue. This is a nonpartisan issue. Children are dying in this country from gun violence. 40,000 people a year are dying in this country from gun violence.
But you know what the other side says. Yeah, then automobiles are a much bigger threat for us because they kill a lot more people, and there's a whole list of things that do worse things than weapons. And when you look at Ted Cruz, not to damn the man, But he did push some legislation about enhancing the procedures of information sharing and how things can get done from agency to agency when it comes to a background check. But it's never been about his intelligence. It's been about his political desires. What makes you think he'll do something?
He's not for background checks.
Right.
And his bill is basically trying to close the loophole between agencies.
Right.
So that's very different than background checks.
Yes.
And he is very concerned that it will lead to lawful gun owners losing their guns. And I made it very clear, we don't want to take all guns from all people. We want to take certain guns away from certain people. We want to reduce the lives lost from this epidemic in this country.
Yeah, you just have two different sides of thinking about how to be safe. One side is less guns, the other side is more guns. And he's on the side of more guns. I'll tell you what I liked. You know, this was billed today as like an MMA match. People were tuning into this Facebook Live because it was going to be like, oh man, Milano and Cruz are going to go at it. This is going to be something. And I love that it wasn't. I love that people who were looking for a fight were disappointed. I like that it was somebody with serious concerns and heart, and him having the gumption to sit down with you and to put it on live, media, and to listen and to respond. It was disagreement, but it was decent, and we need more of that to be sure.
I was very appreciative for the opportunity for that reason alone, but I have to tell you, we have to stop, our politicians have to stop patting themselves on the back when they pass bipartisan bills. Like, you're supposed to work together. That's the point. And this obstructionist behavior that we've seen now from both sides, I think is harming the country in a very severe way. And there are no talking points in the world that can justify the amount of mass shootings and deaths that we've seen at the hands of one assault rifle.
What was the biggest thing that he promised you to do going forward?
He didn't really make any promises. I told him that I would look at this bipartisan bill that would close the data bank loophole, and he didn't make promises, but he did agree that there is a serious problem. And I think that that's a good first step. Look, we need to talk to each other. We need to have these conversations. They're awkward. They're uncomfortable. We fumble. We can't find the right words. But if we all speak from the heart and lead through service not to our political party, but to our country and to each other, then maybe we can get something done here. Maybe we could fix the problems that we're having right now.
Well, it's not about finding consensus, because you can't find a percentage of the country that believes more united in fashion than when it comes to background checks and even red flag laws. So you've got consensus on your side, but consensus among people and consensus among power are two very different things. I think it was a brave thing you did today, and I think it was a helpful thing for everybody listening, no matter where they are. And I thank you for that.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to come on your show and vent. I appreciate it so much, Chris. Thank you.
No, she does a lot more than vent. That was a big step today, and it's something I never thought would happen. Now, in that category, what's going to happen tonight? The polls are one thing, votes are another. We're watching the results in a special election that the Republicans should have run away with. The president won it by 12 points. That's not happening now. John King is back next. Let's bring back John King and figure out what's happening in this North Carolina 9th Congressional District race. What's the latest?
We're getting near the finish line, Chris, but we're not there yet, and the vote that's outstanding is going to decide whether Dan Bishop now has a 2,500 vote lead. Can he hold on? 50.5 to 48.9. This shouldn't be close. This should be a solid Republican district, but it is close, and it will be close. The question is, can Dan Bishop hold on? So what do? You look at the map, you see what vote is still out, and you see, is this possible? So let's start in the biggest pool of votes in this district. That's Mecklenburg County. Let me bring it up. It's the edge of Charlotte. It's these suburbs to the southeast of Charlotte. If you look here, Dan McCready up by a very healthy margin, 16 points in the votes counted so far in Mecklenburg County. So if this margin holds up or something close, only 54% of the votes in, there are more than enough votes just right here in Mecklenburg County for Dan McCready to catch up. But that's a big if. Underline it again. If the margin stays something like this as the rest of the votes come in. No guarantee of that. We have to watch as these votes come in. Or are they from the areas farther out? These tend to be more Republican. Or are they more from up here, more Democrat? We're going to watch as this plays out. But the Republican is ahead right now. The Democrat has an opportunity. Let's just go across the district. 100% in here in a very Republican county. Dan Bishop winning by a big margin there. That is critical to his catching up. Remember, Dan McCready was ahead early on, but 100% in, so Dan Bishop can't count for any more here. Same for McCready here in Anson County, relatively small county, 100% in. That helped him early on. Richmond County, 100% in, so we're done here. Now you're moving over to the eastern part of the district. Scotland County, 100% in. Here are the next two counties, Chris, that matter as we get into the finish line here. Robeson County is the third largest county. First Mecklenburg, then Union County. Union's all the way in. We're still waiting on Mecklenburg. In Robeson County, normally a Republican county, a slight lead for Dan McCready, 92% in. Watch this one. If this one stays blue, it's a good sign for the Democrat. If Dan Bishop can change that, you'll see how this race is going to end. And then here, Fayetteville, Cumberland County, and the Fayetteville suburbs, only 55% in. So in the two areas with suburbs, Fayetteville in the east, the Charlotte area in the western part of this district, still a lot of votes out. You've got about half the vote, a little less than half the vote here in Mecklenburg County, and you've got about the same percentage, a little 45% still to be counted out here in Fayetteville. So you map it out right now. We're at 81. The Republican has a lead. 2,600 votes, 25-58. That's hard to overcome late in a special congressional election. Hard to overcome, but not impossible. If Dan McCready can hold on to his margin here and here, it is doable. We're going to be counting for a while.
We're going to hear different stories told off the same result tomorrow morning. It's good to be with you, John King. Thank you for taking us through it. All right, almost over, but not quite enough. All right, tomorrow, most of us should take time to remember the fallen of September 11th, 2001. Today is also a day that we should remember, and it's about saving lives. How? What about? That's the argument, and I hope we all agree on it. Next. What takes the lives of more firefighters than fire? What kills more police than criminals? More soldiers than combat? The answer for all three is suicide. Here's another take. In a large corporation, say 100,000 employees, every single day, an employee or family member will die by suicide. I'm telling you this because today is World Suicide Prevention Day. More numbers. 800,000 people a year take their lives in the United States. 800,000 a year. That's up 33% since 1999. It's the leading cause of death for men under 50. I'm not ignoring women. Suicide just isn't a threat for women the way it is for men for a host of reasons, but it is real, and there was a spike in the rate for women in 2018. Today is called Prevention Day because unlike so many other major maladies, suicide is preventable. The idea that those who are severely depressed or having suicidal thoughts are beyond help or in hiding, not true. Half of the people who die by suicide see their primary care doctor the month before they die. We just don't ask about mental health the way we do blood pressure or vision, but we should. We can do something. Drug therapy, talk therapy, reducing access to lethal means, they all help. But there is something that is very effective that is in your power alone. And it could be the most effective tool: connection. Studies show that showing you care enough to connect can save a life. Asking people that you know where you live, work out, hang out, whatever. It may sound simple, but checking in with someone, asking them how they are, it hits at something severe: loneliness. We know loneliness is more lethal than obesity or hypertension. And if you couple loneliness with the stigma about mental illness, which is seen as a reason that 75% of people don't get treated, you have the picture of desperation. Someone who is hurting and desperate for help, but afraid to reach out. You need more proof for the urgency? Fine. We all care so much about gun violence, right? Nearly 2/3 of gun deaths are suicide, not homicide, suicide. For all the talk of keeping weapons out of the hands of killers, most often the killer and the victim are one and the same. Now, the challenge is, okay, I care. What am I supposed to say? I'm not a therapist. You don't have to be. You just have to be someone who cares enough to check in. there are questions you can ask. It's called the Columbia Protocol. It's been proven to reduce the number of suicides. It's potent and helps us find people who need help before they write the note or buy the gun. As I said, this is World Suicide Prevention Day, emphasis on prevention, and that is an awesome prospect. We can prevent something that is killing us like almost nothing else. The cure is connection, caring, remembering that we are not just our differences. Another way to see it, it's the same impulse that made this simple hello so special. The two toddlers, Maxwell and Finnegan, so happy to see each other. They run and they embrace. It gives us all the feels, right? You can make it about how we are essentially colorblind, nature versus nurture, place in society. But at its core, the feeling that you get when you see this, the warmth, the relief, it is proof of the power of human connection, that caring makes us human. Compassion is compelling, and it can change someone's condition. Remember that. Please go to the site for the Columbia Protocol. Get the card. You can have it at your desk or in your car. There's simple questions. Connection makes us human, and it can make you a lifesaver. Thank you for watching tonight, and our special coverage, CNN Tonight with D. Lemon, starts right now.
You know how I love you, and I love that video, and I love what you're doing with suicide. And just checking in on friends, because we all go through tough times now and again, right? And it means the most. You may think you're bothering someone, even if you are bothering them. Who cares? Bother them. Check in on them. Love them. And tell them, smack them on the head like you, or you tell me, get your fat butt out of bed and let's go to lunch. I mean, you have to do those things, right? You've got to do it.
It can make all the difference. Now, look, we're blessed. We've got a friend in each other, and we know it. We check in all the time. But, you know, there's sometimes people, look, I don't know about you, but in my life, I've lost people to suicide. And you get hit with this feeling of, I should have done more. I should have done more.
What
Why
did
didn't
I do?
know?
Yeah.
And the human reality is people make their own choices. They're on their own journey. But reaching out to someone who seems a little off, and we have good instincts as human beings. You know, your familiarity with somebody, they're a little quiet. They're not showing up the same way. They're talking a little bit down about themselves. What does it take you to ask questions about how they're doing and how they're feeling and what it could mean and whether or not they're taking care of themselves? It costs you nothing.
Yeah. So I say that video of the two kids, I don't know if they can run it. I don't know who's in control, your show or my show.
Mel, if you got it, put the video back up, or Maria.
But those kids, I love the video. I love the video of those kids. That's like me and you after one of us goes on vacation. Where are you been?
It's how we both run after lunch.
It's really great.
What I love about it is that it makes everything so simple. Yeah, one kid is brown, the other kid is white. But they just see each other and know each other as that. Just somebody that makes them feel good.
Yeah. So I got to tell you, though, I got to run because we got big news. You know, we got the election coming up, and we're following it very closely. We may not be friends after you watch Jimmy Kimmel tonight. I'm just saying.
You didn't go after me for a few laughs, did you? You're not that shallow, are you?
Of course I am. See ya.
That was a rhetorical question. See you later. I'll be watching tonight.
See ya. Bye. See you later. Take it easy. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. Here's our breaking news. The votes are being counted. They're being counted right now. I'm talking about this North Carolina special congressional election that could have huge implications across this country. We're going to tell you why. This is why, because what happens in the state tonight, it could be a precursor. It could tell us a lot about what might happen in the 2020 race. The Republican, his name is Dan Bishop, and then the Democrat, another Dan McCready, locked in a tight race. It's in a district that President Trump won handily in 2016. But it's close now between the Democrat and the Republican, a district that has been solidly Republican since, get this, 1963. Straight to it now. CNN's John King at the Magic Wall with the very latest. But even though the president is not on the ballot, make no mistake, this is a large part of the referendum on his presidency. Votes still being counted, but this is a race that should be an easy win for the GOP. It shouldn't even be close, but it is tonight. We're all over this story. CNN's best people on it, and there they all are. Let's get to one first. Mr. John King at the Magic Wall. Good evening, John. Results are coming in. How does it look right now at the moment?
Getting close to the finish line, Don. The Republican has a narrow lead. Two numbers that matter very much as we get close. A 3,821 vote lead for Republican Dan Bishop with 92% of the vote in. You're right. Even if Republicans just win this race, Democrats will say should have been a blowout. That we're within a point or two is good news for the Democrats. Republicans will say forget that. We won a special election in a tough environment. Guess what? If it turns out that way, both will be right. Republicans, if they hold on, will win a tough race in a tough environment. Democrats will say, we shouldn't be having this conversation tonight. This should have been a blowout. So, as we look right now, 92% in, a 3,800 and change for Dan Bishop, the Republican. This is what's left. The big piece of what's left is Mecklenburg County, 76% in. This is about a third, 30% to a third of the district, depending on turnout. It's the edge of Charlotte and then the suburbs to the southeast of Charlotte. You see it blue for Dan McCready. You see he's winning. This is good news for the Democrats. Again, Republicans are having trouble in the suburbs. That's on steroids in the Trump era. Dan McCready in this part of the district winning and winning quite big. The question, Don, as we get to the end, remember that 3,200 and change lead. Is there enough here? Does this margin hold up as the rest of this vote comes in? And is it enough? Not impossible, but I would argue as we get closer here, it's getting more difficult and maybe even improbable. But watch it. It's not impossible as we watch the votes come in. Why is all the focus now in the end on Mecklenburg? Big Republican county here, 100% in. Dan Bishop wins. Dan McCready winning here, but 100% in. No more to be counted. Move over here, 100% in Richmond. No more to be counted. 100% in Scotland County, the part of the district. No more to be counted. Robeson County, same thing, 100% in. The only place where there are still votes out is Bladen County. It's a small county, but it's a rural Republican county. So Dan Bishop has a lead now. He can expect to get a little bit more as the back half to a third comes in there. This changed the race late. Cumberland County, which is Fayetteville suburbs to the southeast of Fayetteville here, was blue most of the night. It's essentially a tie, but Dan Bishop eking out a lead there, getting a little bit of votes where McCready was leading most of the race. So let's come back to the big picture. Up to 95% now. That lead added a little bit. This is what I mean, how it gets not impossible, but improbable and very difficult in the sense that as the final votes come in, let me pull out Mecklenburg and see what we're up to. We're now up to 90% in Mecklenburg. So Dan McCready continues to lead. The question is, as more and more comes in, Don, can it come in? He has to outperform this. He's been winning 56% of the vote in the county throughout right now. He has to do better than that because when you pull it out, he has to overcome that. Again, math's not impossible. I would argue it's starting to get improbable. What does that mean? It means Dan Bishop is in the lead. In the next hour or so, we should be able to finish this up. And again, if he holds on, Republicans will say, whew, President Trump went in at the last minute. He will say he made the difference. Republicans will say we won. They will be right, and they will have held this seat that they've had since 1963. If you're the Democrats, you're going to look at this, and you're going to think, we came really close. That means we are strong in the suburbs heading into 2020, but you still will have lost a race in which you were very close. Again, we'll count the final 5% probably within this hour and know the winner.
You're right. Listen, a win is a win if they do win. But, I mean, it's got to be, to them, they've got to wonder what the heck is going on. Why, as you said, Republicans are in trouble in the suburbs in the Trump era. I'm just wondering, how does this race reflect, John, what's ahead in 2020? Because, you still got a while until the 2020 they start. We don't know who's going to be on the ballot, right? Before they start counting votes. But, I mean, if Democrats get their acts together and get a game plan, maybe they could eke out a win somehow.
Well, there's two different ways to look at it. The president will say, number one, if the Republican holds on, he will say, I went in late, I helped carry the day. Once we get to 2020, I'm on the top of the ballot, I'll be fine. That is the president's mindset. A lot of his advisors tell him, sir, it's not going to be that easy, but that is his mindset. In the short term, we'll learn more about 2020 as we get closer to 2020 and go through the Democratic primaries. Who do they nominate? Who are the third-party candidates? But in the short term, I will tell you this. Even if the Republican holds on and this number stays like this, in the short term, you are going to see more Republicans who are thinking, we're not going to get the majority back in 2020 in the House, are we? You are going to see, even if the Republicans hold on here, you're going to see more Republican retirements, without a doubt.
All right, John King standing by at the Magic Wall. John, we got 5% right in, and you said we should get it in this hour.
We hope so.
We'll check back. John King, thank you. Stand by. I'm going to bring in now Dana Bash, David Chalian, Nia Malika Henderson. Good evening to all of you, the best folks to talk about this in the business. So, David, I'm going to start with you. It's a tight race. What is standing out to you right now?
Well, one thing, you were just talking with John King, that the president may claim some credit here if the Republican holds on. John was showing you that Cumberland County, where Fayetteville is, and how that was basically a tie. It had been a Democratic lead all night. What is really intriguing there is that, remember, McCready was on the ballot, Don, in 2018. He won Cumberland County by 4 points in 2018. Now it's a dead heat. Well, where was the president last night? He was in Fayetteville. He was in Cumberland County. He will see that as evidence that the last-minute drive into the district and to rally the troops could make a difference with that Election Day vote today.
Dana, you know, you've been hearing some Republicans call the 9th congressional district a swing district. I mean, how worried? It's never 1963 a swing district. How worried are they tonight?
Well, they were worried. They're not completely ready to breathe a sigh of relief until this is actually called.
But it's looking like they're going to win.
But it's looking like
said,
but it's looking like they are. And what David just said about those areas where the president helped, it's not just Republicans who are saying that. It's actually, I've been communicating with the Democratic strategist who's very involved in this, saying that it is very likely that it was the president's visit, the president's effort that popped up the numbers of his base for Republican voters and potentially put the Republican there over the edge if it ends up as tight as it looks right now. We'll see if that's the case. So look, on the one hand, you could say, well, for a Republican president to go into a district that he won by almost 12 points in 2016, that no Republican has won on the congressional level since 1963, okay, so what? But we would have been having a very different conversation if the president didn't go in and if the Democrat did take this seat.
Interesting. Nia, I want to bring you in now. The suburban voters have played a really big role in previous elections. Talk about how important those voters are tonight.
That's right. I mean, they were the story of 2018. Suburban districts across the country that went for Donald Trump, essentially flipping for the Democrats. The Democrats ran candidates in these races, and Dan McCready, of course, was one of them in 2018, who fit the district more, right? They were moderate. They ran on bread and butter issues like health care, like education, same issues that Dan McCready is running on now, and they were able to flip these districts, and that is why Nancy Pelosi holds the speaker's gavel at this point. These are the voters that even somebody like Biden is looking at, right? This idea that there's sort of the Chamber of Commerce Republicans, right, who like the economy, like the fiscal approach of this president, but don't like the Twitter version of this president, don't like the culture war version of this president. You saw in this district that Dan Bishop, he kind of ran a culture war campaign. He himself said it was all about Donald Trump. A lot of the ads that were running were very negative in terms of Dan McCready, and you saw, of course, the president go in there and essentially say that Dan McCready was going to be a rubber stamp for the left, which he called anti-American. So that's the race that he won, ran Dan Bishop, and might win as a result in this swing district. But some worrying signs, of course, for Republicans among those key block of suburban, white, college-educated voters who do seem to be fraying and running away from this president. We'll see what happens tonight in this race.
David, you mentioned it. Dana mentioned it as well. This is what the president said on his way to that rally last night.
I think it's getting less close. If you look at the numbers from 2 weeks ago, and I got involved about 2 weeks ago, and the numbers have gone way up, I think Dan has a very good chance of winning the election. Again, I'm not running, but I have a lot of respect for Dan Bishop.
David, clearly
Again, I'm
he
not
was
running.
worried.
He just wanted a little bit of distance.
Yeah, it's like, well, I'm not running. Yeah, if he loses, I'm not running. But if he wins, it's because of me. He was worried.
And listen, he is going to take credit for this. There's no doubt to it. There's some evidence to suggest it's valid for him to take some credit. He and Pence both go down there the day before the election. They didn't do that just on a lark. They did that because they knew how important it was to hang on to this, to have this moment of, even if it's just a short-term sigh of relief, the closeness of this election, if the Democrat does come up short, is still something that is going to provide heartburn to a lot of Republican strategists looking at the long-term health of the party and their chances in 2020 and taking back the House in Trump's reelection effort. But in the short term, the psychological ability to say that terrible political environment from 2018 is behind us, that is a really important thing for the Republican Party.
And Don, look, he can take credit and probably should, as we've been saying, if the Republican Bishop does win. But the bigger picture still exists, which is this should not have been competitive for any other Republican since, again, since 1963, this has not been competitive. The factor that is different now than all of the decades since is Donald Trump and the trend that we saw in 2018. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
But Dana, no. I'm just riffing off of what you're saying here because we watched the special election. You were up with me covering, and when some people called it a blue wave or whatever you want to call it, but in districts and in these special elections that Republicans had held, especially in the suburbs, John mentioned the suburbs, we talked about this as well. I mean, listen, again, a win is a win, but still, this should not be happening.
No, exactly. That's exactly right. And John mentioned this when he was talking about the latest numbers that we're seeing, that it is a reality that there are Republican after Republican who are announcing that they are retiring in districts like this, or even districts that are maybe not as comfortable as this, but similar in terms of its suburban makeup, in Texas especially, and elsewhere. But Texas is, I think, the most interesting because they don't want to deal because of the Trump factor, because of the reality, because the minority is not so fun in the House, and that's where Republicans are right now, and they don't necessarily see that changing, even in the next election when the president is at the top of the ticket.
Nia, let's see. This was a Trump plus 12. This district, Bishop is currently up by about 2 points. How many more districts does that mean are potentially in play across the country?
Well, listen, I think it certainly means that if you're a Republican, and Dana alluded to this, you're worried. If you're one of these Republicans thinking that in some ways you might have a chance to take back the House come 2020, that doesn't seem so likely at this point. It also, I think, goes to show that running so closely with Donald Trump in these districts seems to be effective at this point. Dan Bishop wrapped himself in the mantle of Donald Trump, literally said this is about Donald Trump. Donald Trump had robocalls to folks in that district, and of course was there on Monday with Junior, with Pence. Everyone was there. The congressional committee poured millions of dollars into this race, so they had to be all in, and it was all in for Donald Trump. So any of these folks who think in some ways, they can sort of play it cute and sort of dial back their adoration and affiliation with Donald Trump as a Republican, that's going to be increasingly difficult. And you see that some people are leaving as a result of that, right? You think about somebody like Will Hurd, who's a critic of this president, basically throwing in the towel because there's no room or very little room in this party for people who aren't kind of all in on this president.
Especially, I would just add to what Nia's saying, especially in red districts like this one. I mean, here's we saw it in last Florida gubernatorial election, Ron DeSantis, right? He went all in on Trump. He was able to win a battleground state that might tilt a little red. Here's the question. Will it work in less red-leaning places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin in 2020? If we're trying to look at lessons from this election, I think that's the big question. Does the full Trump embrace work in some of these less red areas?
All right, stand by. We got a lot of ground to cover here. We'll be counting the votes. Stick around. Our breaking news tonight, the special congressional election that could tell us a lot about what to expect in the 2020 race. John King at the Magic Wall with the very latest. We'll be right back. So here's our breaking news tonight. Results are coming in for the very close race in the 9th Congressional District in North Carolina, a district that has been solidly Republican since 1963. John King. He's back with us at the Magic Wall. John, as I understand, though, that Republican Dan Bishop has held off the Democrat Dan McCready in North Carolina in this district. And again, this was an election that was plagued with that ballot fraud, but it appears that Dan Bishop has held off the Democrat here. It should have been a win, easy win for Dan Bishop. Go ahead. What do you know?
In 2018, it was ballot fraud. Dan Bishop was not the candidate. Mark Harris was. Dan Bishop, the replacement candidate, if you will, for the special election. Dan McCready was the Democrat back then. Democrats thought because of the familiarity, maybe they could pull it off, but Don, we're now ready to call this one. Dan Bishop will win. North Carolina 9 will stay in Republican hands, which it has stayed in since 1963. So your headline there is a Republican win, and the president will say a Republican win thanks to his last-minute visit and his last-minute help in this race. Without a doubt, Republicans will breathe a sigh of relief. They will hold this seat. Dan Bishop winning, you see he's about 4,100 votes ahead with 99% of the vote counted. In the end, even though Dan McCready is going to win Mecklenburg County, it was just simply not enough. It was simply not enough. A big margin there, 13 points. This is the biggest basket of votes in this district, southeast of Charlotte, if you will, in the suburbs, but just not enough for Dan McCready. Dan Bishop holding on. Let me pull the district back out. Sorry about that. Very close race in a district President Trump carried just 3 years ago by 12 points. So the Democrats will claim a moral victory. Moral victory doesn't get you a seat in the House. Dan Bishop will get the seat in the House. The question now is, Don, as we go into 2020 is, yes, this is, even though the Republicans win, more proof in the suburbs here and even over here in this county here, Cumberland County, Dan Bishop held on, essentially a tie there, just about 30 votes. Held on, but in the suburbs, there's no question. Republicans have a huge problem. They hold on here. The president will argue when he's on the ballot next time it'll be different. He'll have $1 billion, for example. He's using the rally, even like the one here, to build a voting list. So a lot of lessons to be learned here. The Democrats, again, will say we shouldn't have been that close. That's good for us. The Republicans will say we won the seat.
What did he win by in 2016, meaning Trump, President Trump?
Trump won this very same district. Let's look at it up here. Let's bring it up. Remember, you're going to have a Republican victory tonight in the ballpark of 2 points, right? We got a little bit more to count, but you're in the ballpark 51-49 if you round those up. So a 2-point race. We go back to the presidential race. This is the very same district. It's a 12-point race. Now, turnout's much higher in a presidential year. North Carolina is a red state, although it's a very competitive state. It leans red. But there's no question Democrats can say, look at this. This was plus 12 just 3 years ago in the presidential race. A lot higher turnout. Again, look at these numbers. 186-9, 147, Gary Johnson getting just shy of 10. That's in a presidential year. Now you come up here and you're talking about less than 200,000 votes. So significant drop-off in a congressional race anyway. Add in it's a special congressional race. Your turnout is way down. But still, a 2-point win for the Republicans compared to a 12-point win for the Republicans. The one unmistakable takeaway here is the suburban revolt that we saw in 2018. Even in 2016, President Trump underperformed Mitt Romney in the suburbs nationally. In 2018, that gets magnified hugely. Nancy Pelosi becomes Speaker of the House. Republicans are going to hold this seat tonight, but in the post-election analysis, the Republicans know they still have a problem in the suburbs. Now they will say, we won this race. Whew, we have some time to try to deal with it.
They're probably saying more than, whew. Probably. We won't go there. John King, thank you. John, stick around. We may need you. We're going to move on and get to our analysts to talk about this. So stand by, John King. As you know, this is our breaking news. CNN projects Republican Dan Bishop wins the special election in North Carolina's 9th district. That, as a new poll, a new CNN poll, gives President Trump bad news about how Americans are feeling about his presidency. Look at this. It's all in the numbers, folks. Only 39% of Americans approve of the job that he's doing. 55% disapprove. 6 in 10 Americans say that the president does not deserve to be reelected. Back with me, Dana Bash, David Chalian, Nia Malika Henderson. So welcome back, everyone. So listen, let's look at this in terms of what happened in North Carolina, what's happening, you know, around the country in many Republican-held areas, or a number of Republican-held areas. This is the president, David, this is the president's lowest approval rating since January during the government shutdown. His approval rating has never really been high. So explain why we are now seeing Republicans losing or running, you know, these tight races in areas that Trump won so handily.
Yeah, well, listen, his approval rating in our poll is 39% nationally, but in that North Carolina 9 district, Donald Trump's approval rating is majority support. I think he's above 50% in that district, just showing you how much the president's approval rating is tied to his election prospects and his party's election prospects going forward. But you mentioned that this is on the lower end. You know, we have talked to Don many times about how Donald Trump operates in a very narrow band of approval ratings here. But this is now consistently over the summer, we've seen him operate in the lower end of that. And here is what I think we see happening. Two things. One, he is not making any gains whatsoever among these independent voters. They have just been pushed away, and he has not done anything to bring them back. That's one. Obviously, Republicans are still super strong from him. I think 88% of Republicans approve of the president's job performance in this poll. But on the economy, which has been his strong suit, what we see in these numbers is that for the very first time in 7 months, he's dipped below 50% approval. He's about even now, 48% approve, 47% disapprove in his handling of the economy, Don. That used to be a big advantage for him. That advantage has been wiped away. It's still his best issue, but it isn't the big advantage it used to be. And I think that has something to do with where his overall numbers are.
The assets, better hope it, it hangs on. But for the first time in 7 months in our polling, his approval has dropped below 50% to 48%. Is he losing his best argument for, or at least on the verge or the possibility of losing his best argument for re-election?
Look, that's exactly what David was just referring to, and that is what frankly, I'm told his biggest concern is right now and he looks to his reelection, understanding very well that a humming economy was keeping him at least above sea level in general, polling-wise.
But even to having a humming economy, his approval rating still wasn't high for a humming economy.
Well, no,
that's
you're
what David
exactly
said. He's
right.
operating within a narrow bandwidth.
No
right?
question, no question. But the economy, his economic numbers, his approval numbers on the economy were keeping him higher than he would have been based on every other issue and based on other issues, of his presidency besides policy ones. So there's that. And when you look at that, not just with this president, how he sees it, he's right that historically, how people feel about a president and how the president is handling the economy, and B, this wasn't looked at in here, but we've seen it more broadly in several polls, and it is a trend in public polling and in private polling as well that I'm told about, is how people view the economy. Right track, wrong track. That is a historic, you remember James Carville, Paul Begala, The Economy Stupid? It all comes down to that. How do people feel about how the country is going, the economy is going vis-a-vis their lives? That has been okay, but there have been warning signs in the last couple of polls. And that is really, really problematic if it continues that downward trend for this president, because it takes a lot to fire a president. And this president has other characteristics that are problematic for suburban voters and others. And it was the economy, it has been the economy that's propped him up as much as he has been.
Well, recently he said, Nia, that he doesn't, politics, he doesn't do everything for politics, but we know he looks at everything through a political lens. And he's got 2020, right in his windshield right now. But 60% in that poll, they don't think the president deserves re-election. I mean, that's got us in shockwaves through the White House, and it has to be concerning to him.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a candidate, Donald Trump wasn't that popular. His saving grace was that Hillary Clinton also wasn't that popular. I think his victory in 2016 proved that you can win the White House while not being that popular. And it could be that looking forward to 2020, there could be the same dynamic at play. Dana there talks about how voters feel. And we see that the president really is, I think, trying to tap into and keep tapping into how voters, particularly white voters, feel about their place in America, right? We saw him in his rally yesterday essentially say he was the one standing between the folks in that audience and Democrats who want to take away their way of life. Now, certainly that appeals to white working class voters, but to a certain extent, it also appeals to, I think we've seen this in some of the data, just regular Republicans, right? His approval rating among Republicans is quite high. We saw that tonight. Sure, we do see some of that fraying among suburban voters, suburban white voters. But this president also, I think, is betting that this sort of white identity politics is so powerful. He has a real emotional hold on voters across this country, white voters, who in some ways feel a sense of nostalgia for the way things used to be and a sort of fear about where this country is going. And so I think this, we can't downplay how powerful that has been for this president and how he's going to continue to go to that well, right? It's why he's willing to literally raid the Pentagon and take away funds for the military to build this wall. He wants to cut a campaign ad with him walking down that border wall and saying he delivered for these people who do have a certain level of unease about where the country is going. So listen, I think this is a president, like most incumbent president, who's probably the favorite going into 2020. So with this result, listen, it was close, but so was 2016.
Right. Yeah. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Here we go. There was another night. There'll be another one soon. We'll be doing this. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've got a lot more in our breaking news. CNN projects Republican Dan Bishop eking out a win in North Carolina's hard-fought special congressional election that really shouldn't have been this close. John Kasich weighs in. John is next. We're back now with our breaking news. CNN is projecting that Republican Dan Bishop narrowly wins tonight's special election in North Carolina's 9th congressional district. This is a race that should have been a slam dunk for Republicans. So what does tonight tell us about 2020? Joining me now to discuss, John Kasich, the former Ohio governor. Good evening, sir. So, as I say, a win is a win, but what message should Republicans take from this special election, tonight's special election?
Well, it's a repeat of 2018. Don, it's obviously they have trouble with the suburbs. That's a real problem. And we saw it out here in Ohio. I've watched it all over the country. But Don, here's something that I haven't heard said tonight that I think we have to think about. This guy, Dan McCready, who, by the way, I saw he was holding one of his kids' hands, a little boy who was carrying a stuffed animal with his head down. If this kid is probably not watching, but if he is, your daddy did good. Okay, so give him a big hug. But, Don, here's the thing. McCready was not for, he was not for taking away people's health insurance and giving them some government program. He was not for some Green New Deal, some environmental extremism. He wasn't for saying we're going to have this big wealth tax. If he had run like that, he would have been pummeled. But he didn't. See, Bill, I think he was a veteran, businessman, all those things. Yeah, and that's who won in 2018. So when you look at the Democrat primary now, you got Biden, who's a moderate, who gets savaged just about every day, and you have Elizabeth Warren, who's a proponent of very liberal ideas, and Bernie Sanders as the top three. Now, if Trump is running for re-election here and he's able to point to those things, say, look how radical that is. Look how far that leans towards socialism or whatever. What do you think happens in these districts? That's why the Democrats had better be very careful. And for some reason, it seems like they just want to talk about all these ideas. And even though they say they want to win, it doesn't seem as though they're putting anything up there that the folks that they need in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, they don't like a lot of that radical stuff. My dad was a Democrat. If I'd have told my dad, hey, Dad, they're going to take your private health insurance, but don't worry, the government will cover it.
I don't know if I'd call it radical,
by the way, they'll take.
John. I'm not sure if I'd call it radical.
It's out there.
Okay.
No, radical.
Stand by.
You may be right.
I want to continue this conversation. I want to take a break, and then we'll talk more on the other side. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Here's our breaking news tonight. CNN is projecting that Republican Dan Bishop narrowly wins tonight's special election in North Carolina's 9th congressional district. I'm back with John Kasich. We're talking about this, and we're talking about what does this mean for 2020. Let me tell you why I said before the break where you said it was radical. Listen, I think it's human nature. It should be, at least. It's what America's about, to want to take care of people who are sick. that everyone is entitled to health care, that we should want to take care of the planet. I know the idea of how you're going to pay for it, that may seem radical. So, and I understand that some people have issues with it, but I'm not sure if it's, to call it radical. But having said that, you have to be, hold on. Let me finish my statement.
Okay, go ahead.
Having said that, you've got to you have to understand the point in time that we're in, and if this is the right time to be pushing for some things that may seem radical to some people. Go on.
Yeah. Look, first of all, Don, if I have health insurance through my employer and somebody comes along and says, I'm going to take that away from you and give you government insurance, that's not covering some. I expanded Medicaid. What are we talking about
Depends
here?
on how good the government insurance is.
Okay.
If the government insurance is really good, then I'll take it.
No, I don't want, but I'm just, okay, well, let me just tell you. In my opinion, most people are not going to say they like that because they don't trust what the government might do. Okay, that's my point is, if you're going
John,
to
you
win,
don't know
look,
what the
Biden
government
is
might
now,
do unless you do it. You don't know what it's going to be. I mean, a government may be able to provide some great insurance. You don't know that. It may provide
Don,
better insurance than I have
tell
through my
you.
employer already. If everybody got on
this.
board, I'm just saying.
Okay, but let me just tell you, no, if McCready had run on that, he would have gotten smashed. That's what I'm telling you.
I agree with you 100% on that part.
Worked. So
I agree with
look,
you. That's why I said you have to be aware of the
let me-
moment that we're in.
Yeah. Okay, let me say this. I believe that 2020 is a reset election. And Biden is way out there. Now he's getting hammered every day, but he's leading right now because Democrats say he's the most electable. I believe that 2020 is a reset election. Get back to some normalcy. The big election for the direction of the country, in my opinion, comes in 2024. And I understand Elizabeth Warren and Bernie are firing up the crowds. I see all that. I'm just trying to say to you that Pennsylvania, Michigan, can you flip North Carolina, Wisconsin? You got to be really careful about what your message is. And if your message makes people uncomfortable, even though they don't like the president, they might say, well, you know what? I don't like any of them. And frankly, it's what happened, with Hillary and Donald Trump. So I'm just saying to you that they've got to be very careful.
I agree with you. We don't disagree on that point. We don't disagree on that point.
Good.
But listen, there are a number of countries who provide health care for their citizens, and it's really good health care. So I don't know if you can say that government health care is always worse than employee-provided health care.
Don, look, I believe
two different
that
points.
The Obamacare
Two different points, but I got to go.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Two different points, but I have
we'll
to go. I agree with you on one of the points. Oh, stop it.
Okay.
See you later. We'll be right back.
Thank you. See you. Bye.
Breaking news tonight, CNN projects Republican Dan Bishop has narrowly won the special election in North Carolina's 9th congressional district. But this is a district the president won handily back in 2016. So should the GOP be worried? They should be celebrating. They did win. Let's talk about it now. Charlie Dent's here, a former Republican congressman from Pennsylvania. CNN political commentator Ana Navarro, a Republican strategist. Hello to both of you. Charlie, I'm going to start with you. Bishop did pull it out. Should Republicans be relieved, worried, a little bit of both? Happy?
Yes, Republicans should be relieved. They should be worried. And they should understand that there was a serious underperformance here by the Republican candidate for whatever reasons. He's the bathroom bill guy. The Democrat was obviously a strong Marine Corps, small businessman. But we've seen Republican underperformance in special elections in the last cycle, too. Montana, Kansas, South Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, the Connor Lamb seat. We've seen this. By the way, The Economist, I saw some statistics in The Economist suggest that there are 32 Republican-held seats in the House that are less GOP leaning than this one in North Carolina. So if I'm a Republican, I'm real nervous because this is not a competitive seat. Shouldn't even be playing ball here. This should be a layup seat, but they had to spend millions just to hold it by 2 points.
Yeah, listen, Anna, at that rally last night, it sure looked like Trump country, and it worked. It worked out for Bishop. What's your take here? What's your takeaway?
Look, I think Trump is going to take credit for it. I think Republicans are going to spin this as a big victory, and I think they should be happy and they should be relieved because a loss would have been a debacle for them. That being said, they're going to pretend to be happy. They're going to pretend that it was a huge victory. But the folks that read the polls, that look at the fine print, that go into the weeds of what happened in this election, are going to be very worried because they see the warning signs. There's a reason why 15 Republicans have announced that they are retiring. There is a reason why Donald Trump is losing independents, has lost so much support from independents. The warning signs are everywhere. They were there in 2018, and they are there now. But they're going to spin this as a big win.
Charlie, listen, you heard what Anna had to say. You have to, you know, this is maybe foreboding or something for 2020, but suburban voters helped Democrats retake the House last year. The president, he clearly has to be paying attention to that.
Yeah, of course, Republicans have been getting cleaned up, and they've been getting wiped out, actually, in suburban areas. I mean, just in the state of Pennsylvania. Don, you were up in the Philadelphia area for a long time. The collar counties of Philadelphia were a killing zone for Republicans in the last election cycle. Look what's happened in suburban Dallas, suburban Houston, Orange County, California. How much more evidence do we need that there are problems with suburban voters, particularly with women? And we're even finding out not just college-educated women, but even white women without a college degree. The president's numbers are slipping there. This is significant underperformance by any measure. And if you're Donald Trump and Senator Thom Tillis in North Carolina, you need to win that congressional district, North Carolina 9, by a much more robust margin than what was won tonight if they hope to carry that state. So I'd be worried.
But you know, Donald Trump is going to continue being Donald Trump and fanning the flames of his base. He's going to continue picking fights with brown people and black people and immigrants and demonizing others and just making this about us and them. And he thinks that works for him. He will continue using his same playbook of division.
All right. I've got to run. Our time is short. Sorry about that because we had the breaking news at the top of the show. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Anna. I appreciate it. Suburban voters were the key for Democrats in 2018. What have we learned about them tonight? John King breaks it down. He's at the Magic Wall next. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. We begin this hour with breaking news on the hard-fought special election in North Carolina's 9th District. The Republican, Dan Bishop, narrowly winning a district that President Trump took handily in 2016. A district so red it's been solidly Republican since 1963. It shouldn't have even been close, but it was. The president taking credit tonight for Bishop's victory, but in the midst of tonight's win, are there warning signs for the GOP? Let's begin with CNN's John King at the Magic Wall. John, good evening to you. How narrow was Bishop's win tonight?
Very, very narrow, Don, and in that, two things can be true at once. The Republicans did win this seat. That's a relief for them in a district they should have won easily, but they won it narrowly. And two, yes, there are warning signs to your point. Let's look at the numbers. Dan Bishop, 99% of the vote in, winning with a little over 4,100 vote margin, essentially a two-point race, 51 to 49 if you do the rounding there, 51-49 in a district President Trump carried by 12 points. 12 points. From 2 points in the presidential, 2 points now, 12 points in the presidential year. As you noted, 56 years this seat has been in Republican hands. The president will claim credit in part because his election eve rally was in this part of the district over here. And no, Dan Bishop did not win Cumberland County by a lot. You can see it right there. It's 35, 36 votes. But Dan McCready, the Democrat, knew he needed to turn this county, the Fayetteville suburbs here, he needed it to be blue to have a realistic chance of victory tonight, and it was not. And just south of where the president visited, in this rural county, the Republican running it up as he needs to do. Now the Democrats, Don, will claim a moral victory if you move over here to Mecklenburg County. This is the Charlotte suburbs. You see the district just sort of touches the edge of Charlotte, goes down into the southeast suburbs. The suburbs have been moving Democratic, and they continue to do so tonight. A big win for Dan McCready in the part of Mecklenburg County that is in the 9th District, just not enough. This math not enough to offset the Republican votes elsewhere. But the Democrats will rightly claim they continue to show that under Trump, the Republicans are in trouble, especially in close-in suburbs. Here's the bottom line, though, if you look at it. Dan Bishop will be the Republican congressman from the 9th District. The Democrats will look at this margin, though, and say, close, what lessons can we learn for other House districts in 2020 that are less reliably Republican than this? Meaning, if you can come within 2 points here, where might you be able to run other candidates? And I would say this, the president is right to take some credit. He'll claim victory tonight. Other Republicans, Don, though, in the House, they're going to look at this math, and you're going to have several Republicans who are already on the fence about retiring thinking, Maybe the 2020 climate, not so great. I might think about going home.
John, Dan Bishop is speaking with the president by phone now. And again, as we've been saying, you know, the president has been taking credit for the win because he went down to help rally the troops and get a win. But listen, according to this Cook political report, there are 35 GOP held seats, you know, that's less Republican than this seat. Will there be concerns about a blue wave sequel, you think?
Yes, a blue wave sequel, that's a harder one to look at. But the president has not had coattails. The president, if you want to go back to 2016, Don, let's go back to 2016 and let's look at the presidential race. Let's take this off and just look at the entire country. If you come out here and look at this, remember, President Trump lost the popular vote. There was not a giant Trump coattail effect as a president often has. So if you look at our new polling tonight, 6 in 10 Americans say someone else should be president. His approval rating is under 40. All that can change between now and next November. The issue for Republicans in these House districts, that's your question, they have to make the decision to run for re-election now or in the next couple weeks, maybe couple months. You look at the filing deadline in your state. You look at common courtesy. Let somebody else get in the race. So the people thinking about should I retire in the House, the minority's not fun. They already think it's very unlikely they get the majority back in 2020. Now they look at a district like this, to your point about Charlie Cook, Amy Walter, the excellent, smart people at the Cook Political Report. If you're in another district somewhere out here in America, all these House districts, you saw what happened in 2018 when the Democrats changed the map. You're thinking this was going to be hard to begin with. Is there a message from North Carolina? Yes, without a doubt. More Republicans will think this is a hostile climate. It's not worth it anyway. The president wins tonight. Other Republicans are going to think long and hard about this.
All right, John, thank you very much. You know, tonight's vote comes on another day of chaos in the Trump White House. Let's discuss now. Joe Trippi's here. He's a Democratic consultant. CNN Global Affairs analyst Susan Glasser's here as well. And Rick Wilson, the author of Everything Trump Touches Dies. Hello. It's good to have you all here, especially on this evening. Rick, let's start with you and talk about North Carolina's 9th district here. It's supposed to be a ruby red district. It has been held by a Republican, as we've been saying, since 1963. So what gives tonight?
Don, what gives is what always gives in these races. Money matters. There were $10.7 million spent in this race. About 6.4 of that were the Republicans spending the amount of money used to spend in a U.S. Senate race on one House district in one state in a relatively affordable media market. They bought this race out of desperation, but you can't scale that. You can't go out and replicate that across district after district in this country. They outspent the Democratic side of the equation all over 2-1 in this thing. So that $6+ million made a big difference. And it's interesting to see how much they were willing to invest in something that should have been a layup seat. There should have been nothing to worry about in this seat at all. Trump won it by 8. Its congressional voting index, its PVI as they call it, is plus. Trump won it by 12. Its PVI is +8. This should have been something they could have stayed home and eaten bonbons and watched sports on TV and won this race, but they didn't. And the reason is that the suburbs, particularly outside of Charlotte, are starting to weaken for Republican elected officials.
I hear you, but bonbons and sports, maybe wings and sports, I don't know, but you know, it's 2020.
I don't know, Don.
It's 2019.
I like to mix it up, man.
Joe, as a Democrat, are you optimistic about what this means for 2020?
Look, you're seeing the same trends that we saw in 2018. The suburbs the Republicans haven't solved that problem. I don't think they're going to on Trump's watch, and particularly suburban women, Republican women. And now it's not just women with college education, but now non-college white women are leaving the party, and we're seeing that drift off too. So when you can't have both an energized Democratic base and women, in particular, younger Republicans too, leaving the party when they see someone across the aisle that appeals to them on common ground and common sense solutions. That's what McCready ran on. I think this is something I think that Democrats do need to think about as we go through our nominating process for president. Is there someone who can do both those things, both fire up the base and appeal to these people who want to find common ground and don't like the division and the divisiveness of the president? That's where I think we need to go as a party, and that's what our process will be about, seeing which of them can do that.
Well, Susan, hi, Susan Glasser. Your thoughts, I want to get your thoughts on tonight. The president, he went and campaigned. He's taking a lot of credit for it. Can he replicate that, or will he be too focused on his own race in 2020, you think?
Well, the answer to the question is clearly, embedded in the question itself. Of course, the president is going to be more focused on his race, but he's a big believer in nationalizing everything, and he's tried to do that, whether it's this House race or last year's Senate races, or really any issue at all. President Trump has a gift for making it about himself, and in that sense, nationalizing it. But look, I have to say, these are all wise words, but let's be real, this is one House race, and in general, it's always a risky thing to characterize the national political trends based on what happens in one House race in a special election, not in a presidential year or any other year. This is a very much of an outlier scenario, and so, the answer is it conforms with where trends are going in terms of President Trump's polling, and it suggests that the party has serious issues looking ahead to 2020, but I would be wary of drawing too much from one special election in a House seat.
Rick, National Security Advisor John Bolton out. It was big news today. I'm wondering if this is the latest example of what you call ETTD, everything Trump touches dies?
I think it absolutely is. And I think, Don, that the main thing I think Americans should really keep in mind is that John Bolton was fired for being insufficiently pro-Taliban by Donald Trump. This is a man who is a hawk by any standard, and he is fired by Donald Trump because he wasn't favorable enough to bringing the Taliban here on the week of 9/11, so Trump could pat them on the head and give them an award or whatever he wanted to do. It's astounding how much damage this man can do to our national security. And firing John Bolton is, it's a perfect encapsulation of the ETTD theory. And you're seeing it playing out tonight on the other network where they're calling John Bolton a leftist and all these other things.
You just took the words out of my mouth. I wasn't sure where I heard it, but I was like, some Trump apologist somewhere I read was calling John Bolton a leftist? Really,
Tucker
Rick?
Carlson.
Yeah, the frozen fish air on the other network called John Bolton a leftist.
Wow. Susan, the Secretaries Pompeo and Mnuchin they were all smiles at this briefing with reporters today on questions about Bolton. Bolton was supposed to be there. Let's take a look and then we'll talk about it.
Bolton was on the guidance to be here. So were you two blindsided by what occurred today? That he's no longer with the administration? Was it news to you today? Because last night you were told he would be here today.
Yeah, I'm never surprised.
Well, let me ask you.
And I don't mean that on just this issue.
Susan, you recently wrote a profile on Pompeo. How big of a role did he play in having Bolton pushed out?
I think the big grins on their faces, Don, told you a lot about how Secretaries Pompeo and
the answers in the video,
Mnuchin,
right?
Exactly. This is one where the picture is worth 1,000 words. Secretary Pompeo, according to what I was told, was not even on speaking terms with John Bolton, and in recent months had been largely communicating through intermediaries with him. And so, it was true that John Bolton and Donald Trump disagreed on many substantive policy issues. But Donald Trump knew that even before he hired Bolton. Now, you could say, well, the hubris of a president to bring in a national security advisor who doesn't fundamentally agree with his worldview, a clash was inevitable. It was also, I think, made inevitable by John Bolton's style and temperament, as well as his policy views. He is a sort of renowned bureaucratic infighter. Ask his colleagues from the George W. Bush administration how they liked working with him. And I think that Mike Pompeo, over time, grew less and less able or willing to work with Bolton. And, of course, that was also, I think, because of the political dynamic that Trump has with those around him, which is to say, if they don't flatter him, if they're not obsequious, look at the lengths to which Vice President Mike Pence and also Pompeo have gone to abase themselves and to make it clear that there's no daylight between them and the president, even though both of them did not support the president initially in 2016 and have policy views well documented that fundamentally disagree with the president. They chose not to go the Bolton course. Bolton said essentially, I am what I am. Here's my views. You watch me on Fox. I disagree, but hey, I work for the president now, so he's the boss. Pompeo essentially has chosen a totally different course to rewrite his own history and to say as if he never disagreed with Trump on anything. And so the risk factor, of course, in allying with John Bolton would be too serious for someone like Pompeo. So I feel like it was a predictable day, and yet somehow Donald Trump always manages to surprise us, even if nobody is actually surprised that John Bolton was fired. The moment and the time and place when it happened and the way in which it unfolded by inviting the Taliban to Camp David the week of 9/11. I mean, Donald Trump did that. It's kind of amazing, right? And we sometimes I think we lose our sense of wonder at this situation.
Yeah. Final word, Joe Trippi, I'll give it to you.
It's kind of unbelievable, but it's believable. I mean, it's just astonishing what this last few days
That's a
have
quote.
been.
It's kind of unbelievable, but it's believable.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. I mean, the only thing is, will he tweet that Pompeo's running for the Senate next, or will? But I don't think that's in the cards anymore. I think Pompeo's stuck for the rest of the term.
All right. Thank you all. I appreciate it. GOP got a win in North Carolina's 9th district tonight, but my next guest says 2020 will be the death of the Republican Party as we know it. I'm going to ask him why. Here's our breaking news. The Republican Dan Bishop narrowly beating Democrat Dan McCready in North Carolina's 9th congressional district, a district that's been solidly Republican since 1963. So the question we've been asking is, what does this say about 2020? What does this hold for 2020? Or what does 2020 hold looking at this? My next guest says that election will be the doom of the Republican Party. So joining now is Stanley Greenberg. He's the author of R.I.P. GOP, which is Rest in Peace GOP, how the new America is dooming the Republicans. Good to have you on. My goodness.
Thank you, Don, for doing this. I know you wanted to do this book and believe in it. And everything that happened tonight is embedded in this book and the trends in this book.
But you're making a bold prediction. You say the 2020 election will result in the death of the GOP as we know it. How can you say that? Why do you say that, Stanley?
Well, for the same reason that you woke up the day after the Women's March and decided to do this show, that every night produces such a critique of the Trump presidency, but also a view of what the real America is. I got up every day writing this book and decided that I owed it to them. The book is dedicated to the resistance and the Women's March, because I knew from understanding what was going on in the country, the history of the Republican Party, that this party was doomed. The Trump presidency was actually the most extreme counter-revolution battle against the new America, and that its ugly fight-to-the-death battle against the new America was going to drive those voters away. And indeed, the fight on immigration would be its undoing. And I want to tell you that's also true as we look at what happened in the election today.
Yeah. Well, I woke up the next day to do this show because this is my job. This is what I do as a journalist, and it's not part of the resistance, but as I do my show every day. But listen, in North Carolina, in this special election,
I'm an pollster, and I try to reflect what people believe. I do not bias.
I understand the sentiment around the country.
Yeah,
I understand the sentiment around the country. Listen, I witnessed it and I reported on it. But listen, tonight in this special election, the Republican Dan Bishop, he beat Democrat Dan McCready in a very tight race. So does that square with your prediction? How does that square with what you predicted?
Well, let me talk about 2018. 2018 there was a 10-point swing nationally in the congressional vote for Democrats in Congress in 2018 compared to Trump in 2016. Tonight's election was a 10-point swing. This was identical. He had a 12-point victory to a 2-point victory. This was simply a replication of what already happened in 18. And what happened, so this was totally aligned with the swing that happened in 18, but also I think it's underestimated what happened in 18, because people are focused on the suburbs, and that for sure they produced big margins for the Democrats, and they produced the most seats. I mean, that's where you were just at the edge of Democrats winning seats. But there was a swing in rural areas in 2018, 14-point swing compared to Trump's election. Working class women and men swung about 13 points more Democratic in 18. So that all of that is reflected in that. And to me, what's most important is what happened on immigration. I mean, today was an ugly day. He campaigned on immigration, talking about, immigrants voting illegally. The day before, when he was talking about the Bahamas, he was talking about the immigrants who are invading the country. So day on day, it's an attack on immigrants. But look at your own CNN poll. He had an overall approval rating of 38%, but his approval rating on immigration was lower than his overall approval. He is driving voters away on immigration. Immigration is hurting him. So yes, he brought out his base, but that's exactly what is happening to the Republican Party.
But let me ask you this, Stanley,
Yeah.
because you're talking about this, and you're talking about the demographics of the country. Political strategists have said for years that the changing demographics will overwhelmingly benefit Democrats, but so far that hasn't been the case in the Republican control. The Republicans control many levers of power now. You've got gerrymandering, you've got on and on and on.
Right.
Republicans still control the big part of the government. What's different now?
There's nothing I hated more than the idea that this was inevitable in the trends in the country. Because what happened with the resistance, what happened with the Women's March, was the recognition that people were becoming so engaged. So what happened was people became, as a result of Trump, became conscious of their values. They became more engaged. We got the highest turnout in the history of off-year elections in 18. In our polling, Pew's polling, we now have the highest level of interest in elections in the history of presidential polling. So people got engaged, thought about their values, and look at immigration. When Donald Trump came in, about half the country thought immigration benefited the country. That's up to 65%, 2/3 now think immigrants benefit the country. Only a quarter aligned with the president. So that what's different is not the trends. What's different is what's happening in people's heads. People are acting on their values, and that's what's producing the shift away from the Republicans.
Stanley, it's a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you
I
for
really
having me.
appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you. We'll be right back. So here's our breaking news on CNN. CNN is projecting that Republican Dan Bishop narrowly wins tonight's special election for North Carolina's 9th congressional district. The numbers are there. Look how close it was. It's pretty close. Numbers right up there on your screen. That as there's some troubling news for our president in our brand new CNN poll. Here to discuss, Catherine Rampell, Alice Stewart. Good evening to both of you. Alice, rocking the school teacher look. I love it. you need the glasses.
It is the first week of class here at Harvard.
Catherine, first, I just want to get your reaction to the results from tonight's special election in North Carolina.
Look, obviously, Republicans should be relieved. This was closer than I'm sure they wanted, particularly given that this district has been in Republican hands for however many years, a half century or something. I forget what the exact number is. So they're relieved.
1963.
Yes, so a very long time in any event. They should be relieved that they didn't lose it. Of course, I'm sure it was a little bit close for comfort, and it's a little bit hard to read too much into this election either way because it's a lower turnout election, of course, than the 2021 will be or any presidential election is likely to be. But it doesn't necessarily give them a lot of comfort, even if for the time being they can breathe a sigh of relief.
Well, Alice, I wanted to get her in first because I wanted to respond. I thought that she might say something like that. So how did you see the results here? Are there signs of concern for Republicans?
I think the reality at the end of this election day is that we all know what you call a congressional candidate that wins by 2 points. You call him
a congressman.
And
yeah. A win is a win.
That is, a win is a win, and really the number and the margin at the end of the day when he is sworn in, it's really insignificant. And yes, Catherine's correct. It would have been nice and probably expected that a ruby red district like this would have had a higher margin of victory, but he did win, and that's the important takeaway.
But you've got to
And
have
if
some concerns
nothing else,
going into 2020, though. You're right. I've been saying that a win is a win. But when you look at 1963, I mean, come on, Alice. No, you're not worried, or Republicans should be worried at all?
No, the reality is he got out the necessary numbers. It certainly didn't hurt that President Trump went out there and rallied the troops. If anything, this should be a wake-up call really for Democrats because, as Joe Trippi indicated earlier, they need to make sure and nominate candidates that motivate the base to win the primary, but also motivate people to come out in the general election and get out the independents and get out the people that hadn't gotten out there before, and that didn't happen. They should have learned that in the presidential election in 2016. And hopefully they take that into 2020. But the takeaway here for Republicans is a win is a win. It certainly helps to have the support of the president, and this is what happened here. And in line with the president's objectives with limited government, fiscal responsibility, conservative policies that are resonate throughout North Carolina, that is certainly what was a win here. And I do believe with the president on the ticket in 2020, that is going to be a big help. A lot of these Republican candidates will certainly ride on his apron strings, and that's something that a lot of these candidates have to look forward to.
Well, let's talk about that, because let's look at the poll numbers when it comes to that, okay? 39% approval rating this president has, his lowest since January. So what do you make of that, Catherine? She's saying, hey, you know, the president still he's going to be on the ticket, but I don't know is that a plus or a minus in come 2020?
Well, I think what's striking here is that his overall numbers are as bad as they are, given that we have still very low unemployment rates. There are obviously worries about the future of the economy, but the overall headline numbers are still quite good. You would normally expect an incumbent president, given this economy, whether or not they are responsible for that economy, of course, as you and I have discussed many times before, whether or not they are responsible for those numbers would get credit for them, and that the overall approval ratings would be higher. So that suggests that if, in fact, the economy turns and the economy is the only thing barely keeping him afloat, he could very seriously be in trouble. And I think that's what the White House is worried about at this point. The economy is the only metric on which he's above 40% in that poll on a host of issues that voters were asked about: immigration, foreign affairs, the environment, gun policy. Everything else was sub 40%. That's the only one that was it still wasn't even half, but it was the only one above 40%.
Only one above 40%. Right. Alice, I want you. Let's talk about this economy, because the president, he keeps talking up the economy as one of the biggest reasons why he should be reelected. But ABC and the Washington Post have this new poll out today that's showing 6 in 10 Americans, Alice, 6 in 10, think a recession is likely in the next year. Should he be worried about his chances in 2020? Because this could affect it.
Look, if the economy does take a turn to the south, yes, that will be cause for concern. But I think it's really important. I'm not one to really pick apart polls, but this one does call for concern. If you look at the way the question was asked, it said, typically, after years of strong economy, it does lead to recession. Do you think one is in order? That is a false premise, because the last time we had a recession 8 years ago, we've had 6 years of strong economic growth. Currently, we have strong economic numbers. We have unemployment at 3.7, wage growth at 3.2. We have strong numbers across the board, and it is not hardworking Americans that turn us into recession as economic policies of the government. And it is in large part due to what the president has put into place, the tax reform, regulation reform. Those policies have helped to date help us to avoid something to the turn of a recession. And just because liberals and critics say we're going to a recession doesn't make it so.
No, look, this is not
Catherine, you're going quickly, please.
This is not the only metric that suggests that consumers are losing faith in the economy. There actually have been several metrics along those lines. Overall economic numbers are not appreciably different than they were under Obama, and if anything, they have been slowing down and turning south. Manufacturing is in a technical recession because of the policies, arguably, of this president, including the trade war.
Okay, thank you both. We're out of time. Thank you. We'll be right back. President Trump trying to convince leaders of historically black colleges and universities. Today, no other administration has done more for them than he has. Trump also told leaders gathered for the annual conference his administration was protecting and promoting and supporting HBCUs like never before. Let's discuss now with former Congresswoman Mia Love, also David Swerdlick, and April Ryan. April's the author of Under Fire, reporting from the front lines of the Trump White House. Good evening, one and all.
Good evening.
Mia, you first. I want to get your thoughts on what happened in North Carolina's 9th District before we do that. Do you think, as others have said, that we'll see more Republican retirements coming?
Well, if you think about what's happened since the president took office, there have been 13% of GOP loss, and that is from people who have either got defeated or completely retired. So that's a significant loss. In this race in particular, what's concerning is that $6.4 million was spent by Republicans, and about half of that was spent by Democrats. This should have been a slam dunk. And what that tells me is that you've got a lot. There's an issue here, right? This is something that has been historically won by double digits. So when you look at areas where the races are going to be a little bit closer, that could be concerning. The other thing that's really concerning also is that this should be a note for Democrats that this was a moderate candidate. So if you're pushing as far as you can to the left, that also might be a problem. I think that Americans are looking generally for somebody who is going to be a little bit more towards the middle.
Okay.
So I think depending on which district you look at, this is going to be a problem for GOP, but it also is a message for the Democrat presidential candidates.
Listen, having been in Congress before, I wanted to get your perspective on that. So let's move on and talk about the subject that we decided earlier. I want to talk about HBCU, this event that Trump again touted, low poverty, unemployment rates for African Americans. Here it is.
Last month, the unemployment rate for African Americans hit yet another all-time historic low. In the history of our country, it's the lowest number we've ever had. And this is very exciting, especially for the folks in the room and those young folks over there that are so great and so smart.
So the latest numbers, they're positive, particularly for women of color. Does he deserve credit?
Well, Don, I mean, here's the thing.
That's for Mia. That's for Mia.
Oh,
Mia. Sorry.
Does he deserve credit? Well, it's really interesting. He takes a lot of credit for a lot of what's been done in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Think about criminal justice reform. Think about Mark Walker, for instance, a member of the GOP who brought over 80 HBCU chancellors to the White House to plead this case for HBCUs. His wife graduated twice from an HBCU. These are people who have been working on these issues for a long time. So for one person to take credit for what a lot of people have been working on for a long time is, I think, a little bit presumptuous. But he did help and sign, some of those things into law. So credit is, you give credit where credit is due. But a lot of people have been working on these issues for a very long time.
So the president, David, your turn now, complains that he is not getting credit for black unemployment. There's a reason for that, because most of that trend began under the first black president of the United States, and that was Barack Obama.
Yeah, look, you should have the president of the United States, including President Trump, touting that the African-American unemployment rate is down. 5.5% is a good thing, and he should say that, just as he did in that clip you played. The problem is when he takes it another step and tries to parlay that into saying that he's done more for black people than his predecessor. Unemployment when President Obama started was at 12.7. It went down when he left office to 7.7. That's a huge drop. It's gone down from 7.7 to 5.5, again, which is good. It's just a much smaller drop. And when President Trump comes out in speeches like today and says, no one's ever done anything more for you than me, or when he said on the campaign trail, what do you have to lose? It was all designed to diminish the record of President Obama, when in fact, if you look at the metrics that President Trump uses the most, unemployment and the stock market, President Obama had a superior record. Granted, he had a longer stretch of time. Trump may do something similar over 8 years if he gets a second term, but there's no comparison.
Yeah, but he also had he was coming out of a recession. Trump is not coming out of a recession.
Which there was more room to grow out of a recession, Don, but there were also tougher circumstances coming out of a recession.
Right, there were headwinds, stronger headwinds. April, here's the president on why he thinks that he'd win a debate with any Democratic contender. Watch.
When I'm on that debate stage with whoever I'm on, these are pretty good numbers to, who's going to beat these numbers? Please tell me.
So, is he putting too much stock in those numbers?
He's putting way too much stock in the numbers. First of all, Don, he had the great fortune of coming into this economy through the Obama economy. This is now his economy. But, and I keep saying this, if the president were to actively do something as it relates to black unemployment numbers, the numbers would be lower. They would be on par with white America. The black unemployment numbers have historically, since Africans were brought into this nation, that our numbers have always been disproportionate from other communities, particularly white America. So he does not get a feather in his cap from me on that one. As it relates to other issues, the black community is very diverse. When he talks about the Bahamas, like he's talking about the gangs at MS-13, with the immigrants. You have to put this president's issues and black agenda issues in totality. This president does not have a good record when it comes to HBCUs, when it comes to black America, when it comes to issues of Charlottesville, when it comes to S-hole nations, when it comes to the exonerated five. He doesn't have a good track record. And then with HBCUs, he said giving the money when he first came into office was unconstitutional. And he didn't give him any money today.
Okay,
so, I mean,
hold that thought.
Yeah.
Hold that thought. I got to get a break in, April and everyone. We'll be right back with this same group. We'll be right back. I told you we'd come back. Here's Mia Love, David Swerlick, and April Ryan. So, David, a new CNN poll released today shows the president's job approval rating among African Americans is at 9%, just 3% with black women. Do you see anything moving the needle for him?
I don't. 9% approval, 85% disapproval in the CNN poll, which tracks very closely with how the president did in the exit polls in the 2016 election. I think you have a situation that we've had for years now where 9 out of 10 black voters vote Democrat. There are reasons for that. It's not an accident. African Americans line up more closely with the issues that Democrats support. And then when you add on top of that a Republican president like President Trump, who is a world-class race baiter, who denigrates African-American women congresswomen, who says S-hole countries on and on, as April was saying before the break, then I think that just makes it that much more difficult for African-Americans to consider moving in significant numbers toward the president.
You mentioned the piece, right? You didn't say poll. You said the Washington Post piece, right?
No, I was talking about the CNN. Was that the
CNN poll? No, because I'm talking about the Washington Post because there's a piece out tonight. I thought it's very good. It's by Jonathan Capehart, and it's titled "What Do Black Women Voters Want?" Mia, this is for you. The gist of it is that while black women have been a critical voting group essential for Democratic wins nationwide, fewer of them see the Democratic Party as the best or the best representation or best representing their interests. If you're a candidate seeing that trend, how do you bridge this gap?
Well, I think that you have to condemn the things that are coming out of the president's tweets. I mean, you want somebody who is going to love America, all of America, white, black, blue, you name it. So I think that that's one of the things that is actually going to hurt the president. One of the things that he did that was good was lifting the ban on faith-based HBCUs. Is that going to do it? Is that going to all of a sudden make us think that the president loves everybody? No, he's got to do a little bit more. So I think that this is, we vote with our hearts first, and then you go and you vote with your mind. You want
April, I got 20 seconds. I really have 20 seconds, April.
I love Jonathan Capehart. Thank you for doing this piece. Black women are increasing in number as head of household and the breadwinner. Black women want someone who feels their pain and understands understands what they're going through. And I will say this, as a black woman and talking unscientifically to a lot of black women are not feeling President Donald Trump.
Fascinating conversation. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we're out of it. Thank you all. I'll see you next time. Have a good evening.
Bye, Don.
And thank you. And thank you for watching. Our coverage continues.